Good morning and welcome everyone to this fifth session of the Africa e-learning and knowledge sharing platform on response to COVID-19 pandemic, which is hosted by the Moroccan Society of Anesthesiology and Intensive Care and supported by the Islamic Development Bank. So first of all, I would want to thank the Moroccan Association for Anesthesiology and Intensive Care in the name of its president, Dr. Jamal Din-Kouhen, which insisted from the beginning about going on with this platform. I will thank also the Islamic Development Bank for their continuous support. And for this session, the African Union Development Agency, which is our partner for this session. So this platform is a sharing space of the state-of-the-art updates about the COVID-19 pandemic. To be honest, we were worried about the huge number of webinars which growed this last week. So we can find webinars about nearly everything. So we asked ourselves, is it useful to go on with this platform? Because you can find the information about the pandemic in every other webinars. But we've seen that the number of attendees for the last 4 sessions did not decrease with time. I think this is due to the quality of the speakers which honored us with their presence and the usefulness of the information shared, which answered to real problems of the real world. So the professionals on the field found answers to their problems in this platform. That's why the number of them attending these sessions growed over time. This session will be the first in English. The other sessions were French speaking, obviously because in Morocco we are Arabic and French speaking. But we wanted absolutely to do one session, at least in English, to open ourselves to the non-French speaking countries in Africa. So we practiced our English. It was hard. And I think we will be able to give you the right messages in the right language today. I hope so. To begin, I will introduce our first speaker, Mr. Amadou Tuano Diallo, the Acting Director General of Global Practices of the Islamic Development Bank, who will start with the opening remarks. So, Mr. Amadou, the field is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Dear esteemed guests and participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon wherever you are in the world. We continue our journey under the Africa e-learning and knowledge sharing platform on preparing for and responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, which was launched by the Islamic Development Bank Group and its partners in April 2020. If the earlier webinars targeted French-speaking countries, we are delighted today to launch the 6th seminar that is targeting medical stakeholders for English-speaking African countries. Our objective at the level of the Islamic Development Bank Group is to support our member countries in their fight against COVID-19 pandemic by providing them with financial resources as well as knowledge, expertise, and know-how in order to build their capacities. Sharing experience, transferring technical expertise, as well as the development of human and institutional capacities are of paramount importance in complementing the provision of sanitary equipment and product while fighting the spread of any pandemic. We fully believe that through South-South cooperation, we can do more together and achieve these ambitious objectives. Until today, the Islamic Development Bank and its partners have organized 5 webinars targeting African and French-speaking countries under the e-learning and knowledge sharing platform. 4 webinars on health-related issues, such as COVID-19 patient management and paramedical and social aspect of COVID-19, and 1 webinar on challenges and opportunities facing South-South and triangle cooperation in the context of the COVID-19 crisis and the role of technical cooperation agencies. These webinars were viewed by more than 16,000 people from 55 isDB member and non-member countries. More than 5,000 medical and paramedical attendees from 18 African countries had the opportunity to learn about other advanced experiences on how to manage the COVID-19 pandemic. The Islamic Development Bank and its partners have been able to mobilize around 80 speakers from 20 countries who generously share their knowledge and expertise. In this regard, I would like to express our gratitude to all our partners and to all those who contributed to the success of the 5 previous seminars, which emphasized several critical health issues and highlighted best practices around the world. A special thanks goes to the Société Marocaine d'Anesthésie, d'Analgésie et de Réanimation Smaar for their voluntary involvement and tremendous dedication to this initiative jointly launched with the Islamic Development Bank. The continuous engagement of this scholarly institution has shown the importance of the voluntary work as well as the crucial role of civil society in responding to COVID-19 pandemic. Today, I'm delighted to kick off the 6th webinar of the platform, which is organized in partnership with Smaar and the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD. I would like to take this opportunity to thank them for their effort to make this event a reality. Through this 4-hour online training course, we will hear from the experts and practitioners about practices on the treatment of COVID-19 patients, as well as lessons learned from member and non-member countries. Let me take this opportunity to thank them for their time and dedication to share their wealth of knowledge and expertise. In addition, our colleague from the health team at the Islamic Development Bank, Dr. Al-Bashir Salam, will shed light on the efforts of the bank since the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic and will share with you the strategies we have put in place to help our member countries navigate through this pandemic. I would like also to thank our colleagues in the reverse linkage team and in the Rabat Regional Hub for giving this opportunity to our member countries to learn from others and share the experiences and expertise in managing the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me stop here and wish you a successful webinar. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Amadou, and thanks for this great partnership with the Islamic Development Bank and also with the African Union Development Agency for this webinar. So I'm very glad, I'm really glad to step to English-speaking African countries now with this sharing of knowledge between our countries. We are very glad for this program today because we have very, very prestigious speakers. We have the opportunity now to share again and again about this pandemic, which is, we see very various epidemic phases in many countries, and there are some second waves in some countries. There are some countries, like in Maghreb, we are a little bit going out from the pandemic, but the repercussions are and the consequences are very important. And also, this pandemic will change our future for all, especially regarding science, because we see many debates all over the world, especially about treatments and vaccines. And we will start with the first speaker. The first speaker is Dr. Samir Mashour. Before presenting him, I want to thank the moderators. I want to thank Ali, my friend, my brother, and my colleague in the Moroccan Society of Anesthesiology and Intensive Care, also the president. But I want to thank my friend Fred Boulamba from Uganda, who is the member of our board of African Regional Section of WFSA. He will talk a little bit later in the discussion. And we move on straight to a very important topic, which is COVID-19 update of forward vaccines and treatments and challenges of supply. This talk will be given by, for me, I had the chance to speak with him last webinar, and I'm proud of a personality, an African personality like him. Dr. Samir Mashour is, I think, immunologist, but he's Senior Vice President and Chief Quality Officer of Samsung Biologics. It's a big pleasure to hear you again, Dr. Samir. You can start if you want.
All right. If you can hear me well, then I can start. Now, thank you for inviting me. It is I think it's 7:30 or 7:40 p.m. here in South Korea. I will try to stay as long as I can in the webinar and to make sure that I answer any question that the audience may have. Today, I would like to share with the audience an update on the vaccines and treatments development and manufacturing, and I will address a little bit the supply chain part of manufacturing, and I'll discuss with you as well a little bit and with the audience the issues and the challenges for supply. And I think if we can have Q's and A's very quickly after my talk, that would be really great, because I think a lot of people probably will have questions on the manufacturing part, on the supply part of either vaccines or treatment for COVID. Just to give you a quick background on Samsung Biologics. Samsung Biologics is a subsidiary of the Samsung Group. It did not exist 10 years ago. It was founded in 2011. It did not manufacture anything up until 2015. So it's 5 years old, but it is today the largest biologic company in the world. It's making biologics and cell therapy products, and it's helping saving lives for probably a few billions of people around the world. So it's great to be part of this big company, and I'm happy to be part of this webinar just to try to help the audience understand basically where we are in terms of vaccines and treatments. So before I go there, there are a few questions that people ask themselves, probably everyone in this planet. The first question is, when are effective drug treatments available to treat various COVID-19 infection stages? Probably the second question is, when will an effective vaccine become available? And the last one is, when will citizens or public authorities will be able to buy or have a supply of vaccines or a drug to treat COVID-19? So I'm going to try to probably answer each one of these questions as much as I can with the information that we have now. Samsung Biologics does manufacture a lot of the treatments that are gearing up for treating COVID-19 various therapies. So to give you just an idea of all of the activities that are ongoing and the extent of the activities for research development and supply of treatments for COVID or vaccines. There are more than 170 companies. There's more than 62 universities and government agencies worldwide that are working on antivirals. Some that are around 330 total that are already in use against other illnesses. So the vast majority, basically, of all of the treatments are drug products that are already available, and they've been now tested through clinical trials versus COVID-19. There's around 53 companies and 22 government research agencies as well working on on vaccines. There are 75 vaccine candidates at this stage as of basically yesterday. And vaccine is the only thing that would be used basically to prevent COVID-19 infections. And some of the earliest treatments, just to make sure that this is clear, will likely be drugs that already approved for other conditions or have been tested on other viruses. So it is expected that these will be the earliest treatments, that the vaccine will come certainly after. Now, a few things on I call them reality checks. There's at this stage, there's no COVID vaccine. Sorry, I think I jumped into. Let me go back to my slides. There's no COVID-19 vaccine that has advanced to the point where it has been authorized from a marketing perspective by any agency in the world, basically the supply chain. So these are few reality checks that where we are today in terms of vaccine. More reality checks, even if we have a vaccine that is available. There is already, and I'm sure will be, a significant mismatch between the supply chain and between supply and demand. This is expected. I think there's an increase in terms of manufacturing, but there's certainly the supply will not be sufficient to treat all of the people around the world. And with the way vaccines are manufactured today, there's absolutely no single country in the world outside of China that is capable to manufacture the vaccine end-to-end, which means the entire supply chain or manufacturing chain from the raw material all the way to the finished product. There's only one country probably that is capable of doing something like that. Not even the US is capable of manufacturing the entire supply chain or controlling the entire supply chains of vaccines. So even if a vaccine is available, there will still be questions on how is it going to be, where is it going to be manufactured? If you look at the few deals between the manufacturing or the filling of AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, it is not the UK who is manufacturing it. They have signed a deal with SII in India for finishing with another company called Catalent as well for manufacturing of the drug substance. So there's no one single country that will be capable of manufacturing the entire basically supply chain of the vaccine. There's one other element that is really important to keep in mind is vaccines or the treatment that are manufactured in a country X are going certainly to stay in the country X until the needs of the population in that country are satisfied. So it means that if the US or China would develop a vaccine that is effective and manufacturing that vaccines, it is highly likely that that country will first cover their own need completely, and probably even beyond their own need, before that vaccine will start being manufactured or used somewhere else. So we have to keep this in mind in terms of reality check. There's a supply chain issue, but there's a lot of probably geopolitical issues that will come into perspective when an effective vaccine is in place, and that as well is valid for the treatments. Now, other challenges is once we have an effective vaccine, it has to be available in large quantities. So this is not going to happen pretty easily. And if a country has to prepare for today in trying to source at risk some of the vaccines that are being under development, and there's only few basically that have been gone through that are at the clinical stage, we don't even know who's going to be successful at this stage in making a vaccine that works, or who we would negotiate with to be able to get the supply of those vaccines. It's not necessarily the companies that are manufacturing the bulk products, or those that are manufacturing the finished product, or those that have authorized the product to be manufactured in their territories, or those that own probably the product. Most important, it's unlikely that all of the COVID-19 vaccine will prove to be safe and effective in clinical trials, and we have to keep this in mind. There's over 70 vaccines that are being developed at this stage. We have no idea if they would prove to be effective, right? And say they're safe for sure, but effective in clinical trials. And very few, many are in preclinical trials, and I'll go through a few of them. I'm not going to go through a lot of the details of my last slides, but there are only few that now are moving into phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. The vast majority are in preclinical, and it will take them way longer. Probably some it will take them more than 12 to 18 months. So we're talking probably 2022 or end of 2021 before we see those that are in preclinical out. So the few that exist today that are in the clinical stage, in phase 2 or phase 3 or phase 1, there are only few of those ones, and it's not all of them will prove to be safe and effective in clinical trials. So this is still to be seen. Now when it comes down to manufacturing, the capacity that is manufactured today for all of the vaccines that are being manufactured at risk is around 5 billion annually. If you put together all of the vaccine candidates that have advanced to the clinical stage. Now the issues with that is that, first is the vaccine will often require more than one dose. By the way, this 5 billion annually, that's a one dose. So all of the capacity for all of the vaccines that we have now that have advanced to clinical stage, if those companies will manufacture, it's 5 billion doses. However, if it requires more than one dose, then we don't have capacity for manufacturing, for supplying those 5 billion doses. And remember, we're 7.9 or 7.8 billion people in the planet. So if you take the example of Moderna, the mRNA vaccines in the US, that one alone includes 2 doses, spaced by 28 days apart for one individual, right? So if you need 2 doses, you need 4 doses from Moderna, which will be then highly unlikely that that vaccine, if it proves effective, that it would cover even the US at this stage. And the number of people who would opt to receive a COVID-19 vaccine, it could probably jump to more than 50%. Versus the norm that we have now. Not everyone is being vaccinated for the flu vaccine. For the COVID vaccine, you need probably much more capacity, because it is highly unlikely that everyone would want to be vaccinated in this one. As I said, most importantly, not all of the vaccines will be safe and effective. So this is just to give you an idea of the vaccines. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can see that the vast majority are preclinical, and just to give you a little bit of idea of the categories of the vaccines. There's 4 or 5 categories. There's the replicating viral, vector, RNA-based or mRNA-based. These are the virus-like particle vaccines, replicating bacterial vaccines. But the vast majority of vaccines what that you'll see in my slides here are either in the US or in the US or manufactured, developed in China, either by China or through some partnerships between China and some global companies, but in China in terms of clinical trials. So you'll see a lot of, like Sinovac in here, University of Hong Kong in here. So there's a lot of companies, certainly in China, that are speeding, accelerating their efforts in terms of vaccines development. And then you have the US. So a lot in here is preclinical. And when it says clinical, even in clinical, you'll see that phase 1 started in for the DNA plasmid here for Inovio. Probably you've heard about it. But Inovio is working, although US is working with a Chinese company at Vaccine Biotechnology, and they started phase 1 in April 2020. For the Codex Genix in here, they're still in animal data, very, very early in the preclinical. There's a phase 1 in here, preclinical as well, for the this is between Janssen Pharmaceuticals, so that's a Johnson & Johnson company working with a hospital in Israel. They're only in phase 1, and this is the last. University of Oxford. This is the second, non-replicating viral vector. It is in phase 1 that started in April 20. All of these vaccines that I'm sharing with you in here, I'm going to share these slides so you can have a lot of time to look at them. But the vast majority, as you can see, are in preclinical. Just so you know, development of a vaccine, as most of you know, is generally speaking is around 10 years. We're trying to speed development of the vaccines to probably 12 months to 18 months. Most of these vaccines have started early developments end of January, the beginning of February. So that's why a lot of the vast majority of the developments are still in preclinical, in tox, probably safety studies. Some of them are in phase 1. There are 1 or 2 that are in phase 2, and the 2 that are in phase 2 are, the mRNA for Moderna that will go to 2, 3 in July, and AstraZeneca and Oxford as well that will move to phase 2 and 3 as well in July. These are the only 2 vaccines that are moving into 2 and 3, and this is where the vast majority of manufacturing happening at risk is for these 2 drugs. And you have seen through, I guess, through the media that many governments have already ordered significant volumes from both companies and have trying to secure supply from these 2 at risk, not knowing if, of course, the vaccines will be effective. But we will have a good idea for these vaccines. Definitely, end of July, beginning of September, to see if any one of those 2 vaccines will be effective against COVID. This is the additional list of vaccines as well. You'll see all of the molecules or all of the vaccines are still at the preclinical stage. There are more than these, of course. Some of them are protein subunits. Some of them are RNA or replicating viral vectors. It's still pretty early now. I mean, most of these vaccines, you probably hear of phase 2 or 3, sometimes mid of next year, if not the end of next year. This is I guess this is my last slide on the vaccine part, and as you'll see, there's still a lot. This is the Moderna vaccine in here, number 35. Phase 1 started in March. The study has ended, all of the studies will end by June. Sorry, I have an error in here, 2020. Phase 2, 3 is starting in July, with first feedbacks from phase 2, 3, end of July, end of August, beginning of September. Now on the treatment themselves, so the treatments, the vast majority of the treatments, if not almost all of the treatments, are basically treatments, drugs that have already been approved. Some of them as far as 1985. Most of them are, already in the market. The vast majority are either antibodies or plasma-derived antivirals, cell-based therapies. and as recent as dexamethasone that you've heard for the last, I guess, 2 or 3 days. The vast majority is antibodies, as you'll see in my slide in here. So these drugs, as I said, exist, and the companies that own these drugs, in this case, Takeda, for instance, or Roche or Celltrion here in Korea, are doing preclinical studies, or some of them, in fact, will be moving to phase 1, phase 2, and quickly phase 2, phase 3 in the next few months. So we should expect certainly the treatments to come to be in the market, because the drugs already exist, as quickly as possible. I would expect, the vast majority will be commercially available to treat COVID, or at least to treat some therapies of the COVID by middle of next year, the first quarter of next year, middle of next year. So these are some of the preclinical trials that are ongoing for, either as an antibodies or as a plasma derived from different companies. They're ongoing. Most of these, as I say, exist, but they will certainly advance to the next clinical trials. You have here a few clinical as well. To the opposite of the vaccines, the vast majority of the treatments are not in China. The vast majority are either in Europe or in the US, or owned by European or American big organizations. Some of them, there are a few that are in the US. But as I said, the vast majority is US and Europe. Few are from Japan. Gilead, as you know, it has been authorized by the US FDA for emergency use. So clinical trials are still ongoing, although it's being used now. And then you have few drugs like the Actemra from Roche, with FDA with approval in the market since 1993. Few drugs in here are still under preclinical development. I think this is my last slide. The vast majority of these as well are still under preclinical developments, and most of the big companies, Pfizer, Novartis, J&J, Merck, Inanta Pharmaceuticals and Takeda Pharmaceuticals, and some of the research institutes as well, are going preclinical and clinical trying some of the drugs that they have for COVID-19. So I wouldn't go more than this for my slides. I would prefer, probably, if there are any questions that I can answer, it would be probably more of a dialogue than going through a lot of the details of the treatments and the vaccines in my slide.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mashour. We have some questions, but I want to start with a question from myself, because now for vaccines we don't know yet for COVID-19 if there is enough protective antibodies, and we don't know how long they can last. And in this debate and polemic problem about some medications, we know also, and I passed to treatments, we know also that for the different phases of the sickness, of the illness, of the disease, we will have a viral phase which needs some medications, an inflammatory phase which needs other medications, and the last phase with the cytokinic explosion and consequences of the virus, we will need other medications. And that this aspect was not studied in the many treatment studies. So it will be in the future, practitioners will be very skeptic about vaccines, especially if we have some antivirals that are very efficient, especially if the patients are treated very precautious and maybe even if we have efficient vaccine, people will tell us it's not a very severe disease. If we are very precautious in diagnosis and treatment, we can avoid mortality, we can avoid intensive care unit, and maybe we don't need vaccines. What do you think about this?
All right. Okay. Well, I think my answer here is pretty simple. The answer to COVID-19 is certainly vaccines first. Vaccine is the only way to prevent the infection from infecting everyone else. The treatments are, I think you need both in the same time. You need the treatments in terms of treating the symptom, the anti-inflammatory aspects of the infection, and then the antiviral growth. So this is where the vast majority, this is where all of the categories of the treatments that are ongoing now, with all of the drugs that are being in fact including dexamethasone, right? Just to treat one of these three aspects of the infection, the symptoms, the anti-inflammatory and the antiviral. But the treatments are, the vast majority of these treatments, of course, you have to be already sick, and probably sometimes you're under ICU, and sometimes you're probably in a severe state before, and that could impact, as is it the case now, the economy of the country if we keep going like that. So the only thing that would certainly get us out of where we are now is we need to find a vaccine first. I mean, that's really important. And we will need to continue with the vaccine, definitely, in here. And we will need the treatments in the same time, absolutely and definitely. I don't think we will ever have herd immunity at all in this planet for this virus. I think that's certain. So this is going to stay with us probably for many years, as the flu is with us for I don't know how many years, right? Except the consequences of the flu are not the consequences of COVID, and we have never shut down the whole country because of the flu. So that's a different thing. The flu doesn't have those kinds of consequences, although it does. We have a certain level of mortality even from the flu. So I would. We have to continue the fight with vaccines. I think it's really important. We need to find the vaccine, definitely. It's the only one that can alleviate, that can fix fix the issues that we have now.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you hear me, Dr. Samir?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay. I have another issue about treatment. What do you think of the polemic of hydroxychloroquine?
All right. So this is in English we say that this is a slippery slope kind of a question. Let me.
Sorry, but
all right. It's all right. It's okay. But I can give you my personal feedback on hydroxychloroquine. It's a mixed. No one ever said that anywhere that the hydroxychloroquine is a no-go anywhere by any agency at this point. But we have mixed results from all over the place, either in the US, in Europe. Of course, it's not authorized in Europe. France, Italy, the UK has pulled the plug on hydroxychloroquine. They didn't authorize it for the US recently has pulled the plug on the emergency use. I think just 3 or 4 days ago they took it out of the emergency use, but still it is still used in some countries, even within the US. It's still used, although it has certain level of mortality. And then you have all of the confusion with WHO at certain point, confusion with the Lancet at certain point. So I think there are a lot of mixed results with hydroxychloroquine at this stage. I would personally, I still need to see a lot of data before I decide, in my mind, if hydroxychloroquine is effective. That's the word. Is it effective at this stage? Has it been shown to be effective at this stage? I have seen a yes from our data that shows a little bit of a yes, but I have seen data that shows a lot of a no. And I would, trust many of the regulatory agencies of many countries. They've made decisions not to keep going with hydroxychloroquine for a reason.
Thank you.
So for anyone, for doctors or for anyone else, I would encourage, patients, certainly, especially if we were in the air here and everyone is listening, that do not use at all hydroxychloroquine without the advice of their doctor.
Yes, I agree. I completely agree.
Okay.
Because we have questions from the public, and Fred will ask you these questions. But we have Her Excellency, the Deputy Minister of Health in Turkey, who wants to ask you some questions also. Your Excellency, welcome with us.
Thank you very much. I want to ask a question to Smaar about vaccines. Coronavirus is a RNA virus, so till now there's no successful vaccine for RNA viruses. Do you think that will we have a successful vaccine to coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 in this manner?
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate your question. Moderna is a new platform. They're using a new technology platform for they call it the mRNA. It's more than just a gut feeling, but I think if there's anyone that can crack the code on this vaccine, is certainly highly likely will be Moderna. Probably AZ, Oxford. They're both going in the right direction. But from an RNA perspective, I think Moderna is certainly, and that vaccine, if that one doesn't work with the new platform that they're using, then we're starting from zero here.
Okay.
Thank you. Another question, dear Minister?
No, thank you.
Okay, Fred, please.
Thank you, Eladib. Thank you, Smaar, for your wonderful presentation. And we have a few questions from the chat room, which would like you to respond to. Two of them are quite easy. One is, how do we prove that a vaccine is not harmful? In other words, how long does it take for us to know that the vaccine is not harmful? I think what the delegate or the participant wants to know is we're looking for effectiveness, but shouldn't we roll out these vaccines after we've confirmed that they are not harmful? The other question is about the involvement of Samsung Biologics in vaccine trial and vaccine development. I think they would like you to shed some more light on that. The tough one, though, is, and this is what I gathered as well from your speech about, what it's going to take to get this vaccine from the lab to a Ugandan like me. And it seems like it's going to be very competitive. It's going to be very hard and tough. And we're asking, what would be your advice, or what do you think poor countries should do to be at the forefront of receiving these vaccines on time once they are proven effective?
Right. Thank you for the questions. By the way, Fred, I would love to be in your place, because if you're sitting somewhere and you have that wonderful palm trees and the sea behind you, that's not what I have here in South Korea. So let me go through the first question, which is how can we prove that the vaccines is not harmful? It's drug development, vaccines or non-vaccines, takes a lot of years, and it goes through different phases. So there's the preclinical phases where you're doing basically pilot studies and it's tox studies, etc. And then you go to clinical phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and even phase 4. So every time you hear phase 1, we are verifying, in fact, the safety of that drug or of that vaccine. So we will not go to phase 2 or phase 3. Phase 2 is safety and efficacy, and then phase 3 is efficacy. So that's how you verify it's through clinical trials, and then you verify if it's safe through phase 1. So anyone from the audience who's not familiar with how drugs are developed, every time it's like a phase 2, it means that the drug has been shown to be safe. If it's preclinical, means they have not shown yet the safety of the drug. So the vaccine will not advance, just to answer that question, to phase 2 or phase 3 if it's not proven to be safe, and safe according to clinical WHO and worldwide and regulatory agencies safety standards. So that's the answer to that one. Now, the answer to the second question, Samsung Biologics does not manufacture vaccines at this stage, but the treatments, and the company is in discussions with many other companies in terms of vaccines manufacturing. It's confidential information. Unfortunately, I cannot share it at this stage, but I would invite everyone to search for Samsung Biologics. You'll see basically what the company is doing from a biologics manufacturing. The last question is probably one that is very important. Is countries that have absolutely no control on the supply chain of manufacturing vaccines or treatments, and have no role in terms of controlling any part of that supply chain, and probably do not have the resources to be able to get that supply into the country. This is where WHO has a role, and this is where the Gavi and all of these organizations worldwide have a role to make sure that we support countries without discrimination, not because they have billions of dollars to go and start buying drug products that are being manufactured at risk. So to answer your question, when would Uganda have the drug, either the vaccines in your shelves quickly? I cannot unfortunately give you a date on that one, but I would invite everyone from every country to understand what the supply chains of all of these drugs that are being manufactured, who's manufacturing or developing those drugs, and then go through governments. Only governments can move things, and I know that some of the countries, even with governments, it will be difficult. But you guys have to go through the government to make sure that you're getting, sort of supply, not just through agencies. Nothing stops you from contacting, those pharma companies directly. In my presentation, you have all the names, and make sure that you have that kind of supply available. Now, this said, remember that the finished product is manufactured by probably completely a different country. In the case of COVID, probably you have one of the finished, like one of the vaccines is going to be manufactured in India. Some of the so you have to understand the supply chain. You go through government, and you go through through those companies. You target those companies that are manufacturing those drugs, and you have to negotiate with them as soon as you can. Some countries have a lot of money. The U.S., they bought $1.3 billion out of the AZ Oxford volumes. A vaccine at risk. I don't think a lot of countries can do that. But we have to, Africa has. If I talk for Africa, we have to talk, one voice, and we have to start securing the supply for the entire continent through one voice, and not each country on their own. It's not going to work.
Okay, we have Fred. We have a question from Ali, and we come back to you to present Her Excellency.
Thank you, Hassan. So thank you, Dr. Mashro, for this excellent presentation and for your patience in answering the questions. Actually, I have two major questions from Morocco about the vaccine. So even if a vaccine available in, I don't know, a few months or a year, there are two issues. The first one is, will it be efficient in all COVID-19 types? For example, if will the Korean or European vaccine effective in the African coronavirus? That is the first question. And the second question is a little bit more problematic. Will the vaccine be necessary? Because in countries with high infection rates and high mortality, it seems obvious that you have to give vaccine to all the population. But in countries like Morocco, with barely 8,000 infections and less than 300 deaths, and maybe less by the time the vaccine will be on the market, will we really need a vaccine for that? So lots of people are worried about that.
Of my question.
Okay, all right. Let me ask the second question. Let me answer the second question pretty easily. The answer could be no, you don't need the vaccine. But I'm going to give you some conditions. One of the conditions is you have to shut your border completely, and no one, goes out, no one comes in. So if you do that, then probably, as I say, probably, I'm taking the risky. You may not need a vaccine. But since that cannot happen, and a lot of people are flying in and out of the country from every spots, etc. And that's how it started in Morocco, by the way. So it's the question: do we need vaccines even in areas where they're not hotspots? If I take the example of New Zealand now. If these guys would shut their country completely, no one flies in from anywhere else, etc., then they're safe, right? Then they don't need a vaccine. They probably don't need no treatments. As long as they open their borders and people start flying from China, from Korea, from the US, from everywhere else, then you're back to square one. Then you have to control the whole thing again from zero. Then you can be going again in the wrong direction. So in Morocco, you will still need vaccines because you're going to open the economy. People will be traveling. If anyone is infected, then it would infect others, and then you will end up in the same issue as we're trying to do now. That we got out of the where the country is in Morocco because of a lot of compromises, and one of them was the lockdowns for so many weeks. And this is not something we're going to continue to be able. There's no country on this planet that can keep going like that with lockdowns. It's just going to destroy not just the economy, but I think everything else. So to be able to go back to a certain normal kind of life, additional to all of the wearing a mask, etc., we need a vaccine. I don't think there's an escape from a vaccine, and I think we have to start thinking how to get the vaccine, how to get there. That's the mindset we should have now, and not can we do it without the vaccine. I think the second question is, would the vaccine be or the first question be effective? If it's effective in the US, would it be effective in? I think that's a good question. There are clinical trials, of course, ongoing in different countries. Everywhere almost. I know that there are clinical trials ongoing here in South Korea. There, in China, everywhere else there are clinical trials for different drugs, different vaccines. In fact, even for different treatments. I think the question is not would it be effective. I'm not worried about that. If it's not effective, if the one in Korea is not effective in Tunisia or in Uganda, then we have to work. We have to make sure of why is it not effective. Is it because of the dosage issue, or is it something else? I'm not worried about that. Now, there's a question probably more important: is how long will it be effective? And that's probably how long we would have immunity once we think that vaccine is effective. And we don't know if it's 1 year or 2 years or even 6 months, and then we're back to square one. So that's something that we need to think about carefully. Is even if our hopes are high for a vaccine, once you have the vaccine, then we don't know if it's only 3 months worth of immunity, or if it's 6 months, or if it's 2 years, right? And that will dictate an entire supply chain, and probably a whole way of, when I say supply chain, is even of operating the hospitals, the clinics, and the whole thing. It's going to take a long time to see. Once we have a vaccine, it's effective, it works for 2 years, which means that we have to wait all the way through until we have like 1.5 to 2 years worth of data behind us. Then we would control the virus at certain points. At this stage, we have a lot of questions where we don't have any answers. And in fact, we don't have even a vaccine yet that is effective.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very, very, very interesting debate. So, Dr. Mashur, I hope if you have the ability to stay with us for the next discussion or debate, we have to move on with the program.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was very,
Thanks a lot.
It's a big pleasure.
Thank you.
Each time. We will have a very, very short cut. 1 minute to prepare Her Excellency the Minister, and Fred will take the lead after.
Thank you very much. I have the honor to introduce Her Excellency Professor Emin Alp Messi from Turkey. Her Excellency is the current Deputy Minister of Health in Turkey. Professor Emin Alp graduated from the medical faculty of Kocherova University in 1997. She completed her residency at the medical faculty of Regis University and became a specialist in infectious diseases. Professor Alp Messi worked for Regis University as an associate professor and professor between 2004 to 2010. She completed her doctoral degree on medical microbiology and infectious disease at Nijmegen University in the Netherlands. Professor Alp served as the deputy chief physician, but also as the vice dean of the medical faculty and head of infectious control board at Regis University. She functioned as secretary of the study group on healthcare-associated infections at the European Society of Clinical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases and head of sepsis group at Turkish Infectious Disease and Clinical Microbiology Association. Professor Alp is a deputy minister since 2018, and she's going to speak to us this afternoon. Welcome, Professor, and please pardon me if I did not get the spellings or the pronunciations for some of the Turkish words. Thank you.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Distinguished participants, first of all, I would like to thank Islamic Development Bank, who enabled us to come together by organizing this webinar. I also thank to everyone for their effort to help this meeting. COVID-19 has shown us once more that we have to act together when it comes to well-being and global health our goals are common. Our responsibilities and interests are the same. The main factors that will catalyze all these are knowledge and experience sharing. In such pandemics, time is also very valuable. Experience sharing is very important to save time. Therefore, I am pleased to share my country's experiences accumulated during COVID-19. These experiences include pre-pandemic, during pandemics, and normalization period. With this understanding, I am very pleased to meet with our African friends. Now, in order to use our time effectively, I would like to start my presentation. There is a current worldwide outbreak of a new type of coronavirus, COVID-19, which originated from China and has now spread to over 200 countries and territories around the world. And now the number of confirmed cases are close to 9 million, with approximately 450,000 deaths. The virus is thought to spread mainly from person to person, between people who are in close contact with one another through respiratory droplets produced when an infected person coughs, sneezes, or talks. Airborne transmission may be possible in specific circumstances and settings in which procedures or support treatments that generate aerosols are performed. Symptoms may appear 2 to 14 days after exposure to the virus, and the typical common symptoms are fatigue, muscle or body aches, fever or chills, and other respiratory infection symptoms. Rapid and accurate detection of COVID-19 is crucial to control outbreaks in the community and in hospitals. Current diagnostic tests for coronavirus include viral nucleic acid tests from upper or lower respiratory tract. Also, serological tests are used for the diagnosis of past infection. SARS-CoV-2 causes a highly variable clinical course that is dependent on host and organism factors from asymptomatic to critical illness. Mostly mild diseases are observed in approximately 80% of patients, and only 5% of patients have critical illness. There is no current evidence from randomized controlled trials to recommend any specific anti-SARS-CoV-2 treatment for patients with a suspected or confirmed COVID-19 infection. WHO and NIH recommend symptomatic treatment and monitoring for mild cases, and also isolation of the patient is important for the prevention of transmission. For moderate cases with respiratory disease, admission to healthcare facility for observation and evaluation is recommended. For severe cases with hypoxia, oxygen therapy, fluid management, and monitoring are important interventions. Administration of empiric antimicrobials within 1 hour of sepsis identification is recommended. And also the escalation of empiric therapy based on microbiology results and clinical judgment are recommended. For critical cases with acute respiratory distress syndrome, high flow oxygenation and mechanical ventilation with lower tidal volumes, prone position, fluid management, ECMO are medical managements. And for therapeutic treatments of COVID-19, as I mentioned before, there are currently no approved drugs for the treatment of COVID-19, but antivirals that are effective on RNA viruses and immunomodulators are under investigation. Also, optimal timing of therapeutic use is unknown. but to start antivirals as early as possible is very important for the success. When we look at the targets of key therapeutic agents, chloroquine and its derivative hydroxychloroquine are widely used antimalarial and autoimmune disease drug that has been reported to be a potential broad-spectrum antiviral drug. Chloroquine is known to block virus infection by increasing endosomal pH required for virus and cell fusion. So inhibits viral entry and endostosis as well as host immunomodulatory effect. The critical point is to start hydroxychloroquine as early as possible because it will inhibit the viral entry. And the other antivirals like ribavirin, remdesivir, favipiravir inhibit viral RNA synthesis. As you know, remdesivir was designed for the Ebola virus disease. However, remdesivir shows broad-spectrum antiviral activity against several RNA viruses, and clinical trials are still ongoing. Favipiravir also has efficacy on RNA viruses like influenza and Ebola, and the efficacy and safety of all these antiviral agents for COVID-19 will be assessed in further clinical trials. It has been recently demonstrated that patients affected by COVID-19 requiring admission to ICU present with a stocking storm with increased plasma concentrations of interleukins and TNF, and this plays an important role in severe cases. Considering the absence of specific drugs, a range of existing host-directed therapies could potentially be repurposed to treat COVID-19. These tables are summarized the targets of key therapeutic agents for treatment of COVID-19, and there are many studies, clinical trials are ongoing about these therapeutic agents. The potential therapeutic benefits of plasma transfusion of a convalescent or cured person from infectious disease and hyperimmunoglobulin began for ago, and this therapeutic approach has been adopted whenever specific antimicrobial agents has not been available for new developing infections. Convalescent plasma can be a potential promising treatment option for treatment of patients affected by severe COVID-19 patients. And now I want to share the experience of Turkey on therapeutic treatment of COVID-19. First of all, we evaluated patient, and if we suspected COVID-19 case, we perform COVID-19 test with PCR. We have national test kits, PCR test kit. And we evaluate patients for risk factors, age or 50 years, chronic diseases are all risk factor for severe disease. And also we evaluate the severity of the disease, and we evaluate the patient's social situation, like home or other things, or poorness like this. And after this evaluation, we decide if we will treat this patient at home or the designated area or at hospitals. If the patient have risk factors like chronic diseases or advanced age, or if the patient is poor or their situation is not available for isolation, then the patient admitted to hospitals or to designated areas like hotels or dormitory. If the patient has no risk factors, then we have outpatient monitoring. And also we have a training program for our healthcare workers, and all healthcare workers have to wear recommended personal protective equipment to be protected against COVID-19 infection. Turkey has a different strategy during this period. From the word, we begin the hydroxychloroquine very early, the previous one. Yes, the previous one. Yes. And for the patients, outpatient, asymptomatic confirmed COVID-19 cases and non-complicated or mild pneumonia, we give the patient hydroxychloroquine tablet per oral. And if the patient have indication for hospitalization, non-complicated or complicated cases, we begin hydroxychloroquine. And if the patient had pneumonia, we usually prefer to use favipiravir. The next slide, please. Yes, the favipiravir for the patients with pneumonia. And the next, yes, the next one, yes. And for the cases also, we use for the pregnant patients, we use hydroxychloroquine or lopinavir/ritonavir. And for the next one, and for the children, we use hydroxychloroquine or lopinavir/ritonavir and favipiravir over 15 years old patients. And at the beginning of this pandemic, the outbreak begins in Turkey very late at the mid of March, but at the beginning of January, we published our guidelines for the therapy, and all our healthcare workers know, all our doctors know what they will do during this pandemic. And there is no problem about supply of drugs. And we have treatment guidelines, and all over the Turkey, all the slide, yes, all the doctors use these guidelines. And there is a success of the low rates of pneumonia during the course. And during the time, the rate of pneumonia decreased, number of cases with pneumonia decreased during the time. The next one. And also we didn't have any problem about ICU bed capacity during this time with this therapeutic strategy. And we have supplementary treatment in COVID-19 patients. Also, we use steroid treatment in the advanced disease, in severe disease. The next. And also for oxygenation is very important during this illness. And we use high flow oxygenation, and we usually postpone mechanical ventilation. We use high flow oxygenation with canoes, and if the patient needs mechanical ventilation, the next one, we use low tidal volumes and low inspirator pressures. And prone position is very useful method for non-intubated patients, and it's very useful for the patients for oxygenation. Next one. And also we use tocilizumab in treatment of macrophage activation syndrome. As in, it's known that MAS may also develop in the course of COVID-19 diseases. And in our guidelines, we suggest tocilizumab for the patients with symptoms of persistent fever, persistently high or increasing CRP and ferritin values, D-dimer height, and cytopenia in forms of lymphopenia, thrombocytopenia, liver function test disruptions, hypofibrinogenemia, or increase in triglyceride levels despite a treatment indicate cholecystic mass. And for the Thromboembolic cases has been also observed in the course of COVID-19 through various mechanisms, and it's a very important prognostic factor in these patients. And this is associated with virus attachment to ACE2 receptors and our direct endothelium damage. And it's associated with vascular microthrombotic disease observed in sepsis, and also with stasis developed in patients related to immobility and hospitalization. And so we have a strategy, the next one, for coagulability treatment also for hospitalized patients and outpatient patients. And also we use convalescent plasma therapy in these COVID-19 patients. And there's just a study finished. It's not yet published, but there were 1,776 severe and critically ill laboratory-confirmed COVID-19 patients in this study. Demographic characteristics and treatment regimes were not different between two groups, and also hospital stay was similar between these two groups, but ICU stay, the rate of mechanical ventilation and vasopressor support were lower in plasma group compared to the control group. And the case fatality rate was lower in the plasma group. However, it was not significant. But we need the optimal dose and treatment time points, as well as the safety and efficacy of plasma transfusion. These need to be further investigated in a well-designed randomized controlled trials. I'm finishing my presentation here. I hope that these lessons learned in my country will contribute to you on combating COVID-19. Such contribution would make myself and my country very pleased. I, for one, learning a lot from presentations. I have no doubt that we will defeat this common global threat to humanity together in a short time. I wish all success to everyone in their noble efforts, and I would like to thank you all for listening. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Thank you very much, Professor, for the wonderful presentation about your experiences in Turkey and how you've managed COVID. In my culture, when Her Excellency or His Excellency speaks, we don't ask questions. So we will thank you for that and pass on to the next presenter. Thank you, Professor Eladib.
Okay, thank you very much. so I know that also the time is very full. I was impressed by the presentation, and I was very glad to see we have the same protocol in Morocco. Instead just something is convalescent plasma, which is starting. And last webinar we have. We shared with the representative of the Turkish Red Crescent who are involved completely in this therapeutics. And it was a very interesting view of what governments can do in collaboration with non-government organizations. And that was a very light for all of us to see the possibilities that we can do all together. I wanted to ask questions, but Fred stopped. Thank you very much, dear Your Excellency. If you want to do a comment before leaving and before passing to Dr. Adnan from Jordan.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was we were very honored to receive you. So next speaker is Dr. Adnan from Jordan. We will do a little distortion because he is involved also in an urgent meeting. So we will stop just for 1 minute and come back to you with Dr. Adnan. dear auditors, we are coming back to the program. We are now, we'll talk about the Jordanian experience. This experience will be shared with us by Dr. Adnan Ishak, who is Assistant Secretary General of Primary Health Care in Jordan. And he's talking in the name of His Excellency, the Minister of Health of Jordan, about measures taken by Ministry of Health in Jordan to contain the outbreak of COVID-19. Dr. Adnan, it's an honor to receive you.
Thank you for invitation to share you in this important webinar. And my all colleagues, good afternoon from Jordan, your second country. Today I will talk about Jordan preparedness and response to COVID-19 pandemic. Sorry. Okay, thank you. Coronavirus disease COVID-19, Jordan interventions, current epidemiological situation. Measures taken by Ministry of Health and Jordan, government of Jordan to contain the outbreak. On January 28th, activate the Epidemic National Committee. This committee contain about 25 members, and in all health sectors and other related sectors. Activate the Epidemic National Committee, writing the National Preparedness and Response plan for COVID-19, and depending on epidemiological situation, we update the response plan. Thermal screening of passengers upon arrival, distribution of risk communication materials with health messages in COVID-19 by all mass media, increasing the capacity National Public Health Laboratory for molecular testing, real-time PCR, implement multiple training workshops on infection prevention and control, awareness campaign on prevention, mainly hand washing, bargaining of travel to hot areas, February 2nd from China, February 15th, South Korea, February 25th, Italy, Iran, and Lebanon, March 2nd, Spain, France, and Germany, and February 15th, a closure of oil shale company, quarantine Chinese workers and separate Jordanian workers from Chinese workers in Jordan, 2nd March, we have the first case with a travel history from Italy. On 15th March, early closure of school and universities, social distancing. March 16th, and extreme measures have been taken by imposing of 14 days quarantine to all arrivals, early highly restricted lockdown, mandatory isolation of infected persons. 17th March, early border control, complete closure. A travel ban was issued except for cargo flights. Early closure of shopping malls, cinemas, restaurants, and recreational facilities. 28th April, segmentation of the country, close certain governorates. Increase capacity of the intensive care units in Prince Hamza Hospital, increase capacity over 1,000 ventilators in the public health sectors. On 16 June 2020, the government announced relaxation of restrictions regarding and decreasing the movement restriction to 6 hours from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. and freely use of approved for opening more of industrial and economic institutions. Our current situation regarding COVID-19, as shown here, we have until now, we have until now we have 1,008 cases, 708 was cared, 170 under treatment, 9 cases deaths, about 320,000 lab tests done until this moment. This epidemic curve shown that about distribution of COVID-19 cases and deaths by week. As you know, we have 23 weeks in this year. First case on 9th week, and as shown here, in 12 week we have 151 cases. And as I mentioned before, until now we have 1,008 cases. Distribution of laboratory confirmed cases of COVID-19 by gender. We have 63% male and 37% female. And this distribution of cases by governorate of Jordan. We have in Jordan 12 governorates, as this map shows that the majority of cases localized in Amman. This is graph shows that distribution of laboratory confirmed cases of COVID-19 by age groups and patient status. As shown here, yellow and under treatment, and green cured, red death, and blue left country. The drivers who come across the borders who have the COVID-19 test positive, he is left the Jordan. And here, cumulative age-specific incidence and mortality rates of laboratory confirmed cases of COVID-19 in general. Red was age-specific mortality rate per 100,000 population, and age-specific incidence rate per 100,000 per population. Proportion of asymptomatic COVID-19 cases. We have, as shown here, asymptomatic and symptomatic the same. Number of tested COVID-19 suspected cases and COVID-19 positive rate by week 22. As shown here, the red will be positive, and the blue number of the tests. COVID-19 lab test by health sectors. We have National Public Health Laboratory. We have 43% of all laboratory tests, and other sectors we have 57%. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Adnan, for the summary of what happened in Jordan during the pandemic. Actually, I have one question. We all have seen that the results in your country are very good compared to other countries. So how do you explain the low incidence of COVID-19 in your country, and more important than that, the low number of death in Jordan? According to you, what was the major one measure that worked and that led to these good results?
Yes, thank you for your important question. As all know, the Jordan take the measures early in this situation. In January, we started the control of all borders and airport, and we quarantine for 14 days for all arrivals to Jordan from any infected country, which is the country have number of cases of COVID-19, and we have control measures for all governorates in Jordan. Regarding the low incidence rate for COVID-19 in Jordan, we strictly take the all arrivals of to Jordan from any country. We take all arrivals to Jordan to quarantine for 14 days, and we test all arrivals for Jordan for COVID-19 to know if the patient have the result positive. We isolate this patient in the hospital. Another patients who have negative result, we take with him a quarantine for 14 days. And after finishing the 14 days, and we have another test to know if he have or had the infection during the quarantine.
Thank you very much. So, if I have to summarize, according to you, the main measure was the isolation and the closure of borders.
Yes.
I have another question about that. It's the problem with these measures that it's not sustainable over time. So, how do you see the future of the pandemic in Jordan? Now that we know that we have to open the borders at some time, we cannot stay isolated forever. So when you will open the borders, how do you think you will manage the probable second wave?
Oh, thank you. You know, we open the country for the all sectors in Jordan, and all live go normally, except universities and schools. After we opened the borders, we opened the borders not fully, but partially. If we open the borders and open the country for all, we can receive any person from the epidemiological status as in Jordan. If the epidemiological status in any country will be increased of cases and increased of deaths, we will take another situation with this country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adnan. So we'll have a little technical break to pass on to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're back for the next presentation, and I have the honor to present Professor Bruce Beaker, which is the chair of the Department of Anesthesia and Perioperative Medicine at the Groote Hospital and University of Cape Town in South Africa. So Professor Beaker is a very famous researcher who is known for his work on perioperative outcome in surgical outcome in Africa. He published two very famous studies about this, and actually he's working on COVID-19 with an ongoing study about the African COVID-19 critical care outcomes study. So, Professor Beaker, we're very honored to have you with us, and we're looking forward to hearing from you about what you think of the necessity of evidence-based medicine.
Thanks very much. And also thanks very much for the invitation to talk this afternoon. So I've been asked to talk about the need for evidence-based medicine at this time. These are my disclosures. They're mainly associated with my research, but I've got no conflict of interest for this presentation. So essentially what I want to tell you is that we have insufficient resources to manage critically ill COVID patients in Africa. And we've got little data to inform us how to manage these patients. And I think, therefore, we need to generate our own data to inform management. And I'll tell you a bit about the African COVID-19 Critical Care Outcome Study, or ACOS. So this was a very interesting publication by Reuters, where they had a look at resources for COVID across Africa. And one of the points here is that we have less than one intensive care bed per 100,000 patients. And we know there's a huge demand for critical care beds for these patients. If we have a look at Africa and we compare it to Europe and the US, we're testing about 700 patients per million. And in Europe and US, they're testing between 22 and 23,000 patients per million. And the next thing is we have less than one critical care bed per 100,000. And in Europe, they got about 11, and in the US, about 31. So we're in the region of about 15 to 40 times less critical care beds per 100,000 population. Ideally, we would like these patients also to have one-to-one, one nurse-to-one patient management. And we know from ASOS that in more than 50% of the hospitals in Africa, it's actually less than one nurse to two patients. And the real problem is, even in well-resourced countries, the mortality with ventilated patients is 72%. So very high mortality, and we're not sure what it is in Africa. And so people have modeled, trying to work out what we need. And the estimate is for Africa, we need about 120,000 critical care beds, and we've got about 10,000 at the moment. So we could expect that the outcomes with COVID-19 are worse in Africa because we have limited testing, and therefore it's very difficult to contain the pandemic through contact tracing and isolation. And we have a limited workforce, intensive care facilities, and critical care resources across Africa. And therefore, it's difficult to provide adequate and sufficient care for these patients. So how could we improve the situation? Well, we could identify signals of harm or benefit. We could look at the literature and conduct a systematic review. We could conduct a rapid prospective observational study. Then we could respond to signals of benefit or harm to inform management guidelines. And then we could close the loop by tracking the patient outcomes according to these management guidelines. So what we tried to do is we actually did try to examine the literature and do a rapid systematic review, looking for risk factors associated with mortality and interventions possibly associated with survival. So there's a lot of literature, and to be honest, we found hardly any data, over 480 abstracts, and all we found was that advanced age and hypertension were associated with mortality and the use of inotropes. So really not very useful. This is actually what we expected. So definitely, obviously, older patients do worse, patients with hypertension do worse, and patients who require inotropes do worse. So there's no useful information actually in the literature at the moment. And this is really disappointing. I mean, 480 abstracts, only 9 studies provide data which could potentially inform us. Only one is a low bias study, and that's got 8 patients in it. So in fact, there's nothing in the literature. And really at this time is a time that we need data from the literature. We really need evidence-based medicine. So how could we improve the situation? We need timely and useful research output during this pandemic. And really, The literature should really follow these following simple rules. They should report appropriate and clear hard endpoints, such as mortality. They should control for bias between groups by providing enough data to compare the groups. They should ensure complete follow-up for all patients, and the data should be readily available in de-identified form so it can be interrogated. So I'm going to tell you a bit about ACOS, or the African COVID-19 Critical Care Outcomes Study. So this is work which is part of the APOR group, African Perioperative Research Group, that's conducted the ASOS study, of which a number of you have been involved, and ASOS2. And on the left is the QR code for registration with APOR so that you can be kept in the loop. And really the motivation for ACOS is the following. We know from ASOS that with limited resources, your mortality is twice as likely to have surgery in Africa, and we expect with ACOS or with COVID-19 and critical care, we have a similar situation because of limited resources. We know from ASOS that ideally for surgery you need 20 to 40 specialists per 100,000. In Africa we have less than one, and that's a real problem that we have to deal with. And then the other real concern is that there's such a high mortality with COVID-19 patients who need to be ventilated. So in the literature at the moment, the mortality runs at about 72%. So if you want to know a bit more about ACOS, there's a QR code which will take you to the website. But we expect that the outcomes with COVID-19 in Africa could well be worse. We expect that if we could establish what the resources, comorbidities, and interventions are, which are associated either with survival or mortality for patients with critical illness, then we could actually propose patient guidelines for management. And hopefully if we disseminate this information quickly across Africa, we might improve outcomes. And really this is the rationale for ACOS. What's the methodology? It's a prospective observational cohort study of patients admitted to critical care with suspected or known COVID-19. It has started recruiting, and we hope to continue to recruit till December. And basically sites would recruit as long as possible. And we follow the patients until hospital discharge. The study's got three objectives. It's essentially to identify critical care resources which are associated with survival. So that might be things like how many nurses there are, or access to ventilators, etc. To identify patient comorbidities and other risk factors associated with mortality, and also to identify for the interventions which are associated with survival. The primary outcome is mortality, and the secondary outcome is to determine the risk factors associated with mortality. And how will this help? So I think this will potentially make a massive difference in that we might be able to provide data to guide patient management during this pandemic. So what we hope to do is conduct an interim analysis in about July, towards the end of July, when maybe there are possibly about 300 deaths in the study. This will associate us, it will help us associate or identify factors associated with death or survival. And from this, we might be able to suggest management guidelines. And then with the ongoing study, we can track outcomes and see the impact of these management guidelines, which will allow us to determine if they actually do improve patient outcomes. It's a very simple study. You register. There's a QR code to register there. Data is captured on RedCap. Some resource data is captured on registration about the hospital, so we understand the environment in which the patient is being treated, and then each patient has a one-page CRF. And it looks like this. It's very simple. Capture some data on comorbidities, capture some data on the physiology of the patient at presentation, what organ support they needed, what management they got, and the outcomes of the patients. The ECHO study will be published in a peer-reviewed journal. We hope to see 2 publications, so one at the interim analysis, which will help us inform us of what might be useful interventions in a management plan for the second half this year across Africa for the pandemic, and then a final publication after that. At the moment, ECHOS is unfunded. We hope that these findings will be rapidly disseminated across Africa so we can influence patient management. And that is pretty much the rationale for this study. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Very interesting. Do you hear me, Bruce?
Yes, I do. Thanks, bro.
So I will start with one question from me, and after I give the next session to Fred. As you know, and as you lived with the ASOS study, there is difficulties in collecting data in Africa. We are many anesthesiologists, but now we have an intensive care disease, and we are much fewer intensivists, and practically everybody is very busy, involved with patients, involved with organizations, with training, with many things. So what do you expect of the possibility of collecting data in this pandemic situation, and what do you expect for the future of research in Africa according to this situation?
Yes. So I think you asked two very important questions. So the first one is, how can we actually collect this data now in Africa? So I think what we've seen in Europe and in North America is that health systems are rapidly overwhelmed. So the first thing to collect the data is, I think we should try and all be involved as early as possible before we're overwhelmed, so that we can at least contribute a tiny bit of data into the database. And from that, if we all contribute a tiny bit before we're overwhelmed, we'll have enough data to maybe help inform management across the continent. So I think that's the first thing. Early participation is important, because I think we're all going to be overwhelmed and we then won't be able to contribute data. Second question is, how do I see research in Africa? I think what's been really positive is the ability of this whole group across the continent to contribute collaboratively. And that's really powerful, meaning that small bits of data from lots of centers really ends up being very powerful, useful data. I'm hoping that the success of what we've all been doing might ultimately at some point result in some funding. What would be really nice would be to see research fellows at places across Africa, different institutions across Africa, to start, coordinating and helping in organization of these sort of continental projects. So if you ask me, that's where I'd really like to see it go.
Okay, thank you. Fred?
Thank you, Professor Bruce, for your wonderful presentation, but also your persistence in forwarding research and Africa-wide research. I think it's very critical that we all appreciate your efforts. There is one question from the chat room, and one of the participants is asking, what do you think has been the impact of COVID on other diseases, especially given that we have poor health systems in Africa, Do you have an estimate of deaths that have come out owing to the diversion of all resources towards COVID as regards other diseases? I submit.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you for that question. The short answer is I don't have an estimate of deaths. I think the reality is that there have been a huge number of deaths because of resources being reallocated to handle the surge with COVID-19. So the problem we've had is because we've got such limited resources that we've had to restructure our healthcare systems to manage the surge with COVID-19. And that's definitely led to increased morbidity in non-COVID pathologies. So I think that is a really big concern. And on top of it, I think patients have actually become quite nervous to go towards hospitals or seek medical help because they're worried that they're going to get infected. So there's also, on the flip side, the patients aren't accessing or identifying themselves as needing healthcare. So this is a huge problem. There was some work in the surgical space which was done by the NIHR Global Surgery Unit from Birmingham on estimating loss of surgeries because of COVID. And it's a great paper. It's freely available. It's a British Journal of Surgery paper. It was published maybe a month ago, but it's got great supplementary files which will show you the estimates for how much surgery is estimated to have been lost in all the countries. And I can talk for South Africa. So South Africa's estimate is that we probably have lost 150,000 elective surgeries in a 12-week period. So if you think of that, the impact of that on surgical pathologies, it must be enormous because those essentially are, I mean, lots of cancers, sort of elective type cancer surgery, which you push back 12 weeks, and then some of them become emergencies, and then they get pushed back again. So it's a big problem. I don't know the numbers, but there's a huge problem, and it's going to probably take us ages to catch up. If we added, I think we worked out if we added 20% to our normal surgical volume in the post-COVID period, we could increase our surgical volume by 20%. It would take us nearly a year to catch up with the surgeries alone. So this is going to be a big health problem for next year or 2 years, definitely.
Thank you, Bruce. And I think for Uganda, for example, one of our big challenges has been access to healthcare rather than the inability of the people in the hospital to provide care. We have a lockdown and curfew, which has been ongoing for the last 3 months. And that means that if you get sick in the night, you may not have access to the hospital, especially if you don't have a car. The ambulance system is not yet well developed, although that's in the process. So I could say that for Uganda, it has not been a problem of getting the care when you get to hospital, but a problem of getting to the hospital. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred.
Give back the microphone to Eladib.
Thank you, Fred. Also, it's really a very big issue that you said, Bruce. Non-COVID patients are very, very important. So, for example, here in Morocco, we have, and we still have many difficulties with hospitals or departments completely transformed to COVID disease.
Yes.
But in other departments, for example, in my department in gynecology and obstetrics, we have 0 cancer waiting for surgery. It's tragically was done because we created double circuit, parallel circuit in the same hospital and in the same department. I think it's a big issue for reflection in the future. Thank you very much, Bruce. Do you want to comment this or
I think I'll do a short comment because I know you're behind and you want to move on. But the reality is in our environment, for example, in Africa, our patients we don't have enough access to surgery. And the reality is the proportional number of patients for cancer who are missing surgery is much higher in Africa than in high-income countries. So I think in high-income countries with the lockdown, they've probably had about a 50% reduction in cancer surgeries, but really in Africa, we're talking in excess of 70%. So this is a huge problem. Cancers are a big problem, and there's going to be a lot of cancer morbidity going forward from this.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very interesting area.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very, and I hope many teams will join you to ACO study. So we will move because Professor Rina is ready. Hello, Professor Rina. I present you before because Professor Rina is the section head of infectious disease, and she is the fellowship director of infectious disease fellowship program at Aga Khan University in Kenya. She is currently leading the department in COVID-19 response as head of infectious disease and a frontline worker. She has also been involved in the development of the national case management guidelines in Kenya. We are very proud to have you with us, Professor Rina, and it's an honor to hear you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yes, great.
Yes, okay. So I'm going to talk about Kenya and our experience with COVID-19. So for those of you who may not know, we're a small country, probably the size of France, on the east coast of Africa. We're bordered by Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Somalia. And if we look at Africa as a continent, as of the statistics yesterday, we've had almost 300,000 confirmed COVID cases in Africa. 130,000 odd have recovered, and we've had about 7,600 deaths. The majority of the cases are like in very North Africa and South Africa, and we're in like the middle belt. But that's probably because we're early in the epidemic, that we haven't got as many cases as our South African colleagues yet. So this was a paper that was published in Nature a week or 10 days ago, which was talking about COVID-19 in Africa, the spread and response. And it said, given the current trends and incidents in underlying healthcare systems vulnerabilities, Africa could become the next epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic. As the pandemic transitions to a more widespread community transmission, which a lot of us are seeing at the moment, how can lessons learned thus far be consolidated to effectively curb the spread of COVID-19 while minimizing social disruptions and negative humanitarian and economic consequences? And that's really important for us in Africa, because as we learn from the West on their experiences and how they've managed therapeutically the condition, we've also got other unique issues in Africa, especially like as the previous discussion said, that the patients may be not able to get to hospital. It's not even just about the hospital care. So there are many other things that we in Africa need to think of on how to manage this pandemic. So in Kenya, the first case came on the 13th of March. And since then, we've now got more than 4,000 confirmed cases and about 100 deaths. And our case fatality is 2.6%. And if we look at this graph, it shows you how we've been with the pandemic. So after the first case, around the third week of March is when we started the mandatory quarantine. So anybody who had traveled or come in contact with anybody who was positive was quarantined. And then we started testing of persons in quarantine at the end of March. Early April, we started a curfew. So it means at night, after 7 p.m. till 5 a.m., you could not move out of your house unless you were part of an essential service. At the same time, mass gatherings, churches, weddings, mosques, everything shut down. And then towards the end of April is when we started the mass testing, and since then we've had a lot more tests. Also, if you look at the graph, the yellow are the ones that are the asymptomatic COVID patients. Blue are the symptomatic, and the red dots at the top are death. So if you can see, majority of our patients are asymptomatic. And because of the increase in testing, we're getting more and more cases as the days go by. And now we believe we're firmly into community spread in our country. So like I said, we initially banned mass gatherings, international travel stopped early in April. The other thing that our country did was the mandatory wearing of masks. We have to wear masks from the end of March when we go out in public, otherwise it's an offense and you can be arrested and fined. Social distancing came in late March, restaurants and bars were closed, and travel to countries Kenya is divided into counties. So like I live in one county, which is Nairobi. The second biggest other county is Mombasa, which you've all heard of. You cannot travel unless there's essential services. So we've stopped inter-county travel, and that has also affected healthcare because majority of the best healthcare is in the big cities and not in the small villages or the smaller counties. So our cases, just to show that our cases are going up, and this is showing the number of laboratory testings that are going up. We have a positivity rate of 3.2% of everybody we're testing. So interestingly, majority of our patients in Africa are asymptomatic. 88% of all those that have been tested, 12% are symptomatic. And majority have the typical symptoms: cough, fever, difficulty in breathing, headache. But although in our hospital, we're starting to see the asymptomatic presentation, a bit of myocarditis and encephalitis in patients with symptomatic COVID-19. A majority of our patients are male. So we have a male to female ratio of 69% to 31%. So, and I think that's what's also been reported in other countries. And our age group is literally between the age of 20 to 60. So we're in the middle. We don't have our population in Africa is not elderly. So even the patients that we're seeing coming to us symptomatic are in the middle age group. Having said that, even the ICU patients that I see are also in the middle age groups. It's not the typical 78-year-olds that has been described in Europe and the US. We're seeing 40-year-olds with non-comorbids, and we're watching that space. The case fatality rate, these are the deaths. We've had 107 deaths. Again, we've had more deaths in the males than the females, a majority in the over 60-year-olds, but we've also had deaths in the 40 to 60 age group, and that's worrying for us as a continent. So what about our next step? You know, we're trying to get a web-based laboratory data repository system just to see who is all COVID-19. The Ministry of Health, in collaboration with the WHO, plan to build capacity for counties. Like I said earlier on, majority of the good healthcare or developed healthcare is in the towns and the cities. So we want to go out there in the villages who've been newly affected with COVID-19 and to manage the quarantine facilities across the country. And the Ministry of Health is rolling out home and community-based isolation and quarantine protocols across the country to reduce excess loads on the current facilities. So like I said, we are like China. Majority of our patients are mild, but the reason that we're putting in all these precautions is to reduce the number of severe and critical patients. In Kenya, we have less than 200 critical care beds, and our hospitals are also very few. So if we get overwhelmed and there's a surge, we will not cope. I mean, if the Western democracies have not been able to cope, we are really going to struggle here in Africa. We know that majority of the patients get severe disease later on, after 1 to 2 weeks is when they get the critical illness, and we want to prevent that. So the mainstay of treatment of mild cases of COVID is supportive care. You must monitor for symptomatic progressions. If somebody comes to you on day 1 and they're within the first week of asymptomatic disease, you've got to educate them to say, look, you're not out of the woods. You know, you've got to give it 2 or 3 weeks to be completely okay. We've got to target the elderly, the patients with cardiovascular, cerebrovascular risk, respiratory disease, kidney disease, liver disease, and diabetes. And in our continent, a lot of these diseases happen earlier on in life. So we could get a lot of cardiovascular disease in people in their 30s and 40s. How is HIV going to pan out? We don't know. But once the epidemic reaches us, we will know, because we're in sub-Saharan Africa, which has the highest number of people living with HIV. So as has been said earlier by my previous presenters, there is lots of studies, lots of protocols, and limited experience. And evidence is changing on a day-to-day basis. There was a time we said hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, we've moved away from it. Last few days is talking about dexamethasone, but we just need to keep on the trends on treatment. There's more than 400 clinical trials looking at new agents, repurposed antivirals, antimalarials, and immunomodulatory agents. But like I said, we watch the space and we need to do these trials in Africa. Like the previous speaker said, only then we will know how our patients are going to respond. Just to add that, remember that there's a biphasic nature of COVID-19. There's the early infection, the pulmonary phase, and the hyperinflammatory phase. And there's different treatments or the different things that you need to consider in treating these patients. And before all this comes in the vaccine. So before we have the vaccine, in the early viral phase, we know 80% of the patients do well. So not everybody needs treatment. But it's when you go to your stage 2 and stage 3, the pulmonary phase and the hyperinflammatory phase, which is marked with a host inflammatory response with high IL-6 levels. Those are the times you need to think of things like IL-6 inhibitors, convalescent plasma, which some hospitals can offer, but you've got to be a very good, sophisticated hospital and have a good critical care system to be able to offer these medications. So I work in a private hospital, which is in Nairobi. It's JCI accredited, and we do have a lot of these other treatments. But not every hospital has these medications or the capacity to monitor the patients after these treatments have been given. So the Infectious Disease Society of Kenya has said that clinicians should preemptively put in place measures to monitor and assess the outcomes of different treatment regimens through either observational or international trials that will help inform our national treatment guidelines. Our current national treatment guidelines is not recommending any of the treatments. We're not giving hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, steroids, unless you're part of a trial. So unless you're part of a study, nobody routinely gets these medications. And I thought this was very, very funny, thinking that, after all these seminars, you come back and say, how are you going to manage your patients? Standard of care is the best thing to give. In terms of medications, I think we still have a long way to go. And the randomized double-blind clinical trials are what's going to inform what you're going to put our patients on. So when you think of Africa, you've got to think that right now there's a lot of travel ban. Our borders are closed. Our borders are closed within our countries, our counties, towns, and village. So we need to develop healthcare for our countries, what works for us. And I turn to the affluent who've always gone abroad for good healthcare. Now's the time. COVID has taught us that we've got to develop good medical care where we are. We can't always go out for better care. So we've got to provide the best care where we are, and we need to work towards that. I must say solutions are different for Africa. What works in other parts of the world may not work here. We have our economy, we have daily wage workers. To tell them to isolate at home, they're going to die of hunger and poverty. So we've got to come up with solutions that work for Africa. There's cost issues. We've got to make the medications available and cheap. When we get the remdesivir and other medications here, our patients are not going to be able to afford what patients abroad pay. So we've got to really think and cost it well, and the governments have to look into that. Other diseases should not be forgotten. We discussed that a bit earlier in the previous presentation. HIV, malaria, Ebola. As we close our borders, if we institute lockdown, how are patients going to come and get their ARVs? Patients are dying from malaria. In my experience, patients are coming very late to hospital. So normal pneumonia that would be admitted to the hospital ward is being admitted to the ICU because the patients are scared of coming to hospital and are coming to hospital late. Like I said earlier, studies and trials should be done in Africa on Africans, so we can learn on how our patients are going to respond to these therapies. And we need to improve our infrastructure for education, do more e-learning, make sure there's internet available everywhere, and access to e-learning should be there. I'll end with a saying by Marie Curie, who said, "Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood." We've learned from our HIV epidemic. We used to be very scared of HIV, but we've learned to live with it. And we will learn to live with COVID. And now is the time more than any time to understand more so that we may fear less. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rina. Very interesting experience. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Fred, do you have questions?
I don't have questions from the chat room, but I have one which borders between a question and a comment. Like you said, Africa, not all countries are the same, not all have instituted the same measures, and not all are affected equally by the COVID. For example, in Uganda, we're in a situation where we have not had any deaths so far. We have about 800 cases right now, and no death. And that has been misinterpreted by our populace to mean that the disease is not really that fatal. I mean, I understand it, but the common populace may not. And over time, we've seen a drift from being law-abiding citizens who abide with the guidelines from the ministry and from the president to a population which is drifting away from that. Do you see the same thing happening in Kenya? And if so, what kind of message do we need to put out to see that the benefits that we got from the lockdowns can be useful going forward? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because what you're saying is probably what we were thinking a few weeks ago. But after that, the mortality started increasing. So I think for it to become a reality to the average citizen is either they have to see people who are infected or know people who are infected or see the deaths. And until that happens, they believe that it's something that's just government-led or international-led or propaganda. But as our disease has gone and gone into the counties and affected a lot of, so initially it was just a disease of travelers, people who'd gone to Europe, people who'd gone to the US, come back and brought the disease back with them. But as the community spread has started, and it's become a reality in our country, it's people are becoming more and more careful. It's moved from the dictatorial, you have to wear your mask, you have to social distance, to, people are like going out now, and yes, everybody's wearing the mask, they're trying to social distance. There's a lot of discussion. We have a lot of media discussions on this, trying to educate people to say, look, this is happening. It is a reality. And as people are getting infected, I think what has also helped us is a lot of the church leaders have got COVID-19, and they've come out to the press and said, hey, guys, this has happened. I've been in hospital, I've been unwell, I've been in ICU. This is what I went through. And hearing a first-hand experience from these patients is making people understand and believe that this can happen. It's very interesting. I do believe that our case fatality rate so far is lower than the rest of the world, but probably that is because our population is younger. We don't have such a huge population over the age of 60, 70 as the rest of the world does. But despite that, we still are seeing deaths in the 40, 50-year-olds, which is not nice, because that's not the age to die. And I think people are realizing that. So media, politics, healthcare, we all have to put in our work to educate the people.
Fred, thank you, Pastor. Fred, there is another issue in our context with mortality. Mortality for us is related to two things. The first one is patients who are coming very late in advanced disease. So when we started to go searching for patients, testing everyone, and isolate them and treat them very fast, the mortality was lowered, the very important lowering of mortality. So we call it free interval between starting symptoms and caring of patients. That's one prognosis factor, very important. The delay of taking care of them. And the second one is our intensive care treatment, including not to intubate very fast, oxygenation, high flow, non-invasive ventilation, and also in severe patients, corticosteroids, and recovery talked about that, and especially anticoagulation in patients. All hospitalized patients in Morocco are under low molecular weight heparins. because they are hospitalized for long periods. They have a very close spaced. They don't move, and we can do anticoagulation also, curative anticoagulation according to DDMER. So I think those mortality is really related to this delay and the quality of care. What do you think, Professor Ina?
I agree. Yes, so quality of care is definitely important. It also depends on where you go. And like what we said earlier, is in our setup in Africa, sometimes getting to hospital is so difficult because a lot of the borders and counties are closed because there's no ambulances available. The normal matatus, which are the buses that ferry you, are not available after a certain time. So it's also the time you fall sick and you go to hospital. That's important. And it's becoming a challenge. Having said that, it's very interesting that our neighboring country, Uganda, hasn't had a mortality yet. And that's very interesting for us to say, why has there not been a mortality? Are you testing enough? Is the testing across the whole country? Is it only happening in the main cities? Could it be that a lot of patients with COVID present with the same symptoms as other things and they're being seen as something else? A lot of fever in Africa is malaria unless proven otherwise. A lot of cough is just a URTI. In fact, everything is malaria until proven otherwise. So these are interesting that even though we're different from Jordan, we're so different from just our absolute next neighbor, which is Uganda and Tanzania. Tanzania is saying that they're not having any cases at the moment. So even that's very interesting for us, that in Kenya, we have so many cases, we're getting almost 300 every day. And Tanzania, who's next to us, is saying that they don't have any cases.
Yes. I think the response will come from CDC. So thank you very much, Professor Ina. Very interesting. So we will move to Dr. Raji Tajuddin. Do we have to stop a minute, or you can share the... Yes, it's okay. Can you share your presentation? So while we are sharing, I present you Dr. Raji Tajuddin. Dr. Raji Tajuddin is a medical doctor with postgraduate qualification in pediatrics and public health. He is currently the head of Public Health Institutes and Research at the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Africa CDC. In Addis Ababa. He coordinates the establishment and strengthening of national public health institutes across the 55 African Union member states. Welcome, Dr. Raji. Do you have your presentation ready?
Yes. Can you see it? I'm already sharing.
Okay, we come back with Dr. Rajita Juddin, who is the head of Public Health Institutes and Research at the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Africa CDC, in Addis Ababa, and he is leading many programs through the 55 African Union member states. Welcome, Dr. Tajuddin.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues from Morocco. Thank you, colleagues from Islamic Development Bank. Thank you, fellow panelists, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Africa CDC, permit me to take you through those different areas as far as COVID-19 response is concerned, where we have supported our member states, and to also highlight what more do we need as we embark on this journey together. As we are all aware, the outset of this pandemic, we knew that less than 50% of our member states have access to modern health facilities. We also know that a lot of our member states have less than 10% of their GDP spent on health, as against 15% that was unanimously agreed in Abuja. We also knew that we have around 2 health workers per 1,000 population, as against 25 health workers per 1,000 population that is obtained elsewhere. And we know that we are faced with recurrent epidemics of different other diseases like Ebola, yellow fever, cholera, measles, and so on and so forth. So all these combined actually put most of our member states in a very precarious condition as far as responding to the COVID-19 outbreak. So where are we globally as far as COVID-19 is concerned? Today we are saying that we are far above 8 million total cases globally, with over 450,000 deaths in more than 208 countries and territories. Coming down to Africa, we are currently above 276,000 cases on the entire continent, though we can say that this is just around 2% of global total cases, but we are fast evolving, and we don't know when we are going to peak, neither do we know when we plateau or when we begin to come down. In terms of deaths, we have over 7,000 deaths, and this constitutes about 1% of global total. Again, we can say that this is small compared to what is obtainable globally, but we are still evolving. We don't know where we're going. In terms of recovery, close to half of our patients have actually recovered. Then in terms of case fatality rates, globally, we are talking of 7%, between 6 and 7% case fatality rate. But in Africa, our average is around 2.7%. Though if you disaggregate this further, the northern part of the continent seems to have a slightly higher case fatality rate compared to the other parts of the continent. So what have we done as a continental agency? First, we have been able to carry our member states along through series of meetings, first at the level of the technical people, secondly, at the level of our politicians. If you all recall, the first case in Africa was detected on the 14th of February, 2020. A week after that, Africa CDC or African Union were able to bring together all the ministers from across our member states to sit down together and come up with a continental approach to this COVID-19. So the summary of that, of the communique that came out of that meeting was there was need for us to coordinate, there was a need for us to collaborate, there was a need for us to cooperate, and of course, information sharing is actually key to what we are supposed to be doing as a member state. So going forward, what did we do? In terms of strategy, this particular strategy was also endorsed at that ministerial meeting. So we're approaching this COVID.
Mr. Tajuddin. Mr. Tajuddin.
apologies for that interruption. So in terms of coordination, so we coordinate at the technical level and we also coordinate at the political level. So as we all recall, the first case of COVID-19 was on the 14th of February 2020. So a week after that, Africa CDC convened high-level emergency ministerial meeting that brought together all the ministers of health from across our member states. At the end of that meeting, the communique emphasized the need for coordination, the need for collaboration, the need for cooperation, and the need for information sharing between our member states. At that same meeting, a continental strategy was approved. So under this continental strategy, we had 7 technical working groups that is looking at the various aspects of the response. For point of emphasis, Morocco led or co-chaired the risk communication and the community engagement strategy through the Institute Pasteur in Casablanca. And of course, we have other technical working groups as well. So this is the Africa CDC strategy. So we are approaching the response to COVID-19 pandemic from 3-pillar perspective. 1, prevent transmission. 2, prevent death. 3, prevent social and economic harm. In terms of what we are doing, we have been able to support member states in terms of surveillance. We trained our member states on the issue of our surveillance, especially at the point of entry. We also currently have over 5,000 clinicians spread across the continent on our clinical community of practice platform. So weekly, this group of clinicians have a meeting, to decide on what is new and what do we need to do going forward and advise our member state as appropriate. We are also working on the area of infection prevention and control. And in this regard, we have trained virtually all the member states. When we started with 37 countries, but today I can comfortably tell you that we have trained virtually all our member states, including sub and above the Sahara. In terms of supply chain, we've been able to support member states with test kits. We've been able to support them with ventilators. We've been able to support them with personal protective equipment. Let me shed a little light on lab. At the beginning of the epidemic, to be precise, early February, there were only 2 labs in Africa that could test for COVID-19. By the end of February, Africa CDC had trained 48 member states. Currently, we are building the genetic sequencing capacity of 12 member states so that they will be able to sequence their organism. There's no need for you to send it anywhere. You should be able to do it yourself. So we are building that capacity. And together with our colleagues from Morocco, we've been working on risk communication and community engagement. About 4 weeks ago, as part of our strategy, Africa CDC rolled out what we call Partnership for Accelerated COVID-19 Testing on the continent. And the goal here is to conduct 1 million tests in 1 month. At the end of the first month, we had conducted over 2 million tests. So our target is that by September or by August, we should have tested 10 million. Today, we are on 3.6 million. So we are getting there. Then secondly is for us to establish African-wide pool procurement platform. So this is a platform that will allow our member states equitable and affordable access to medical supplies. It will allow us equitable and affordable access to the global shortage of supplies. And we're also deploying 1 million health workers to support testing, tracing, and treatment, because we all know that quite a lot of our member states do not have the capacity, to carry out what is needed to respond to this COVID-19. So the big question will be, why do you need to scale up testing? We believe that when you scale up testing, you're able to identify and isolate cases, especially the asymptomatic and the mildly symptomatic cases. It will also give you room for robust contact tracing, especially as we begin to ease our lockdowns on the continent. And of course, with smart screening and testing, we'll be able to uncover areas of concentration of cases, and will give us a better insight into what is happening as far as COVID-19 is concerned on the continent. So this is our approach as far as this initiative is concerned: to test, to trace, and treat. In terms of human resources, as I mentioned earlier on, we know that some member states do not have that capacity. So together with the Africa Peace and Security Council, we are deploying volunteers to support member states. As you can see, that military are playing there. So this was put at the disposal of Africa CDC by the government of Cameroon. You know, and with this particular venture, we've been able to support a lot of member states with lead epidemiologists, with IPC experts, with data managers, and we have also been able to work with the national government to deploy community health workers to support this COVID-19 response. In terms of community engagement, you will agree with me that without engaging the community, there's little we can do as far as the response is concerned. So we have a technical working group that is looking at that, and this is co-chaired by Professor Abraham Maroufi from Morocco and Dr. Benjamin from the Africa CDC. And today they have been able to track all form of rumor as far as the continent is concerned. They have been able to address misinformation. They have been able to work with the lead social media companies like Facebook to make sure that misinformation are properly addressed. And they have been able to put in place an online platform where we regularly engage our civil society organizations and the faith-based organizations. In terms of testing, this is one area where Africa CDC has made significant progress. We continue to support member states with test kits. We continue to build their capacity. And we'll continue to provide them with guidelines, especially the need to decentralize testing so that we can scale up this testing as much as possible. And we're also building the genetic sequencing and capacity of our member states. So this is a graph showing where we were early April, and this is where we are as of today. You can see we're around 200,000 on the continent within the first 2 weeks of April. Today, we have passed 3.6 million on the continent. And in terms of our testing, you can see the countries that are leading the pack. We have South Africa, we have Morocco, we have Ghana, we have Egypt, and so on and so forth. We have Uganda and Kenya. Then in terms of tracing, the emphasis here is to be able to trace each and every contact of every positive case, you know, and we need to do this smartly so that we don't waste our resources. And this is what Africa CDC is doing to guide member states on how to do it better, through training, through provision of guidance document, and through all sort of training platform and deployment of our volunteers to support our member states to do this. Now, in terms of treatment, we are also working to make sure that each and every positive case receive the necessary care. For the mild cases, they are managed at home or within a community facility, you know, and Africa CDC plan to support this with deployment of community health workers. Then for the moderate, severe, and critical cases, these are the ones that we manage at our facilities. We are also supporting this with all form of capacity building our platform. We're also supporting this with deployment of our medical supplies and experts to be able to carry out this treatment efficiently and effectively. So these are our priority as far as the case management is concerned. So again, this slide is talking of the evaluation we've been able to do. For case management, as of today, we've been able to cover 50 member states. We have more than 5,000 clinicians under that platform that meet weekly to discuss. There's also what we call office hour that allow for teleconsultation, you know, case scenario and one-on-one discussion with lead experts around the world, including our diaspora community. So in terms of vaccine, we know that what is going to be the game changer as far as this epidemic is concerned is vaccine. And we know that access to this vaccine is going to be an issue, whether we like it or not, as articulated in the presentation from the Vice President of Samsung. So in order to position ourselves strategically, the African Union, through President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa and our chairperson, Musa Faki Mahamat, a kind of high-level meeting will be conducted next week, 24th to 25th of June. So this meeting or this conference will be focusing on, one, research and development as far as vaccine is concerned on the continent. It will also be looking at vaccine manufacturing in Africa. It will be looking at logistics when this vaccine eventually become available. How do we manage that supply chain? Then again, it will look at how do we strategically engage our community so that they do not refuse this vaccine, so that there will be, robust and comprehensive uptake as this vaccine is concerned. But more importantly, this meeting will be looking at affordable and equitable access to this vaccine. We do not want a situation whereby Africa will only benefit from what trickles down. We want to benefit from what comes out first. We want to be prioritized as the first set of country that will benefit from whatever vaccine that come out. So this is the essence of this particular meeting that is coming up next week. Please, you are all invited. Mark the date on your calendar, plan for it, come, let's hear your voice, and collectively, let's, take this decision together. In terms of mental health and psychosocial support, you will agree with me that COVID-19 is something that is mentally draining, especially for our frontline health workers, especially for caregivers of vulnerable population, for people in quarantine, for people who are isolated, and for people in treatment centers. So Africa CDC is guiding that process through production of a guidance document that will allow us to be able to address things like stress, anxiety, stigma, and psychosocial disorders. At the outset of this pandemic, quite a lot of our countries locked down. Now they are beginning to ease their lockdown in order to avoid either second wave or skyrocket, a very rapid increase in cases. Africa CDC, through partnership with WHO and more importantly, our coordinating ministers. Coordinating ministers will mean the ministers of health, the ministers of finance, ministers of trade, ministers of transport. They have all looked at this document and agree that we need to put something out there that will guide our member states on how to strategically open up, for them to do it in a very stepwise manner, for them to be able to protect the vulnerable group, and more importantly, to advise each and everyone on the need for social behavioral change. So to conclude, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we know we are responding to COVID-19. We know it's resource intensive, but we should not lose focus of essential health services. We should not lose focus of things like sexual and reproductive health rights, things like maternal and child health, things like our malaria, TB, and HIV programs. We don't want to repeat the mistake that we did in West Africa, whereby we lost over 11,000 people through Ebola, but much more than that number died from other essential health services. So in this regard, there is need for each and every member state to have a protocol that will govern delivery and continuity of essential health services. There is need for our member state to continue to monitor the performance of utilization of health services. There's need for us to identify these gaps, and there's need to address whatever gap that we identify as far as essential health services are concerned. And we should not spare any opportunity when it comes to talking about this. Whenever we have opportunity to give a message on COVID-19, please and please, let's talk on the need to continue to run our essential health services. Malaria is killing, cholera is killing, maternal and child health issues are there, childhood immunization is there. We need to continue to run this. And again, we should also remember that as we respond, we should be planning for recovery. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Africa CDC, thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Great talk. Thank you. Go ahead, Fred. Please, Fred.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reggie, for this energetic talk as we come towards the end of the series. And it's very important that organizations like CDC come out and actually let people know that they're involved in this. But let me start off the discussion with a rather controversial issue here, and that is to seek your position on what would take as local remedies. A case in point is Madagascar, with a Malagasy COVID therapy or remedy that I'm sure you've heard about. Do you have any role in developing local or African remedies towards some of these diseases?
All right, thank you, Fred, for that question. So let me take us back to the Madagascar local remedy called COVID organic. During one of our head of states meeting, the president of Madagascar did present that remedy to his fellow colleagues, the fellow head of states. So at that meeting, the Africa CDC was requested to work with Madagascar to be able to understand what exactly is this COVID organic. And since then, we've actually been working collaboratively with them. In fact, of recent, we have brought WHO into the picture. One, to establish the safety, to establish the efficacy, and to look at the data that led to this COVID organic coming on board. We have made a lot of advancement, and I think very soon we will be coming up with a position on what exactly member states should do with this COVID organic. And we are using the same opportunity to also look at some other local remedies on the continent. And in this regard, we have set up a technical working group that is actually looking at this closely and working with the Institute of Applied Research in Madagascar to understand this COVID organic and advise our member states as possible. So that's all I can say for now, but we are working closely with the Madagascar authorities together with WHO. And very, very soon come up with advice for our member states.
Thank you, Dr. Taji. You have a note of appreciation from Professor Bruce Beaker. The other issue that we are seeing, at least from my country specifically, is that the cost of the testing kits that we're using right now is pretty expensive. Are there any efforts towards getting cheaper testing kits so that they can be, because that's what is limiting the availability to nations, especially poor nations?
Fred, I completely agree with you. One major issue as far as this responding to this pandemic is concerned is the global shortage of medical supplies, including the test kits. And this was actually driving the cost of everything up. So what the head of states have actually done was to work with our private sector, and with the private sector, they have been able to put in place a platform. So this platform is a pooled procurement platform, So after putting in place the platform, they have been able to engage these manufacturing countries at the highest level, demanding for African quota in such a way that we'll be able to get this thing at a competitive price, bearing in mind that some of our member states are quite fragile, are quite vulnerable, So we'll be able to put a platform that will be able to guarantee this. And Afrexim Bank has also come on board to support member states who are not able, to buy some of these things right on the spot. So they will provide some sort of credit facility that will ensure that cost does not deter people from having access to this essential medical supply. So that procurement platform that we have put in place will actually address this issue of cost. So I bet you for all countries that key into this procurement platform, you will get the test kits or even your PPE at the best price you can get anywhere in the world. So that's what this platform seeks to address. Over.
Very informative. Thank you very much. Yes, Professor Eladi.
For gaining time, but I have a question. First, great talk. Loved about everything about it, and especially test, trace, and treat it's something very, 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 very important for Africa. Really, and we have seen that you did very huge work and still to come. My question is about collaborative aspects. There was a question on YouTube about the collaboration with WHO, and you answered to that. But is there an equilibrium between countries in terms of your huge work? For example, there are language barriers from Portuguese-speaking countries, French-speaking countries. I think Maghreb is Maghreb countries involved in these topics. Also, is there any collaboration with CDC through what is coming to African countries? For example, there were donations, mask donations from China. Now our king is leading a donation to 15 countries. So is there a collaboration in this topic?
Okay, thank you, Prof. So let me start with collaboration with WHO. Let me say that right from outset, Africa CDC was launched in 2017. But the discussion started from 2013, and WHO was part and parcel of that discussion. In fact, the ministers of health actually shouldered, they requested WHO to work with African Union to see to the establishment of Africa CDC. Now, with Africa CDC coming on board, we have a framework of collaboration with WHO, and we've been working perfectly together. Let me also say that WHO has appointed 6 envoys to look at this COVID-19 on the continent. The director of Africa CDC is one of the 6 envoys. The task force that is overseeing the affairs of COVID-19 response on the continent, the steering committee, is co-chaired by WHO and Africa CDC. Each and every technical working group that we have as Africa CDC, WHO is part and parcel of that technical working group. So we've been working perfectly together with WHO. In terms of the issue of working with our member state, issue of equity, access, and all those things in terms of a level of participation of the different member states. So at the African Union, we have 4 working languages. We have Arabic, we have English, we have French, we have Portuguese. So as to ensure that everybody is covered. And when we release a document, it goes out in these 4 languages. Otherwise, it will not go out at all. You know. Then coming back to Africa CDC specifically, we have 5 regional collaborating centers. One in the south in Zambia that is bringing the southern member states together. One in the north in Egypt that is bringing the northern countries together. One in the west in Abuja that is bringing the West African countries together. One in Kenya in East Africa, then in Central Africa, one in Gabon. These are called regional collaborating centers. So these are part and parcel of Africa CDC, and this is to ensure that the CDC is not just seen as something at the capital in Addis Ababa, but rather you see it as something that is as close to you as possible through the regional collaborating centers. Now for the medical supplies, let me start from China, the Jack Ma Foundation. In terms of logistics and distribution, Africa CDC has been working closely with World Food Program to ensure that each and every member state get their share of this donation. So we have been coordinating that aspect. So for the donation from the king, so what we will do now is to work with the ISU pasture in Morocco, because for Africa CDC, at the top, that's our operating model. Now, at the top is the headquarters in Addis Ababa. At the region is the Regional Collaborating Center. Then at the national level, the National Public Health Institute. So in Morocco, we are working closely with ISU Pasteur in Morocco under Professor Abdurrahman Maroufi. We are also working with your School of National Public Health in Rabat in terms of training. So we are actually taking every member state along in everything that we do. So that is what we do, and that's our approach to carrying everybody along as far as our member states are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Really impressive. And I want to profit. We have competencies, we have experience. We are giving our hand to you if you want to share in the future. And we are disposed to do everything for our countries, for African countries, for South-South collaboration. Really, it will be major issue for the future. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So we will cut for just 1 minute to prepare Dr. El-Bashir and come back very fast. Thank you very much, Dr. Ajit.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, we are moving to the last speaker. It's a very important topic with our big partnership with the Islamic Development Bank. I want to remember everybody that Moroccan Society of Anesthesiology and Analgesia and Intensive Care is doing partnership with Islamic Bank for science and for many things. So we here, the memberships, professors and doctors from the society, we don't have any conflict of interest inside. So it's important to say that. So we are doing this because we have a noble profession, and we have to share with our brothers, and we have to save lives all together. So I present Dr. El-Bashir El-Tayyib Salam, who is the lead global health specialist of Islamic Development Bank Social Infrastructure Global Practices Division, Economic and Social Infrastructure Department. He served as a technical officer with WHO, UNFPA, and UNICEF from 1995 to 2006. He was director of epidemiology department of the Sudan Federal Ministry of Health. He has an extensive global advisory experience with governments and international non-governmental organizations operating in the field of health. So it's a great pleasure to have you with us. Thank you, Dr. El-Bashir, and please welcome.
Bismillah, salatu salam, Rasulullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and good afternoon to everybody. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for giving us the opportunity to share some of the lessons which the bank has accumulated during its response to this pandemic. The presentation aims to shed light on the COVID pandemic situation in our IDB member countries, to share the main challenges, lessons learned from IDB interaction with member countries, as well as some recommendation for the use of our member countries. For those who are less familiar with IDB, the Islamic Development Bank is the only multilateral development bank which is really supporting South-South collaboration and cooperation. It has 57 member countries, 21 in Sub-Saharan Africa, all the MENA 22 member countries, Central Asia, CIS countries, the 6 CIS countries from Central Asia, Suriname, and Guyana from South America, South Asia, Bangladesh and Maldives, Pakistan, and Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, are a member of the Islamic Development Bank group. As far as the situation, the pandemic situation as of yesterday, we see the skyrocketing mode of cases recorded since March up to yesterday, where more than 1.3 million cases have been registered. At the right side, you will see the countries with the highest number of cases registered, including Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, Bangladesh, followed by Egypt and then Afghanistan. And we will come and see why this situation is like. Turkmenistan is the only IDB member country, probably the only country in the world still reporting 0 cases for different causes. However, limited testing capacity and quality of the surveillance, as well as the challenges in confirming cases of death, hamper getting accurate count of true total numbers, as well as number of cases, as well as numbers of deaths. This is a comparison between how the situation looks like in the world, where more than 8 million cases have been registered and around 400,000 cases reported. And the blue column shows the cases in our member countries, the 57 member countries. Here is the graph reflecting the four countries in the world with the highest numbers and the case fatality rate at the top of the bar, and compared with Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, the countries in our constituency with the highest number of cases and with the relevant case fatality rate. And we see that Saudi Arabia, despite the high number, still the case fatality is really less than 1%. Similar in Pakistan, it's really very smaller, and the highest is in Iran, but there are a number of cases we are going to see in other countries. As I highlighted, Yemen, for example, followed by Chad and Algeria, are the ones which really have shown very high case fatality rate due to multiplicity of causes, including late addressing of the cases to the health facilities, as well as the quality of the management of cases. Here, this slide shows the testing rate as of yesterday in our member countries compared to the 4 major countries in the world. In Russia, we see that the testing rate per 1,000 population is around 107, while the highest in our member countries is in Bahrain, is 257. And of course, the highest, the testing rate shows the capacity, the capability, I mean the financial condition of the country, as well as the quality and capacity of the laboratory to conduct tests. In the IDB response to the COVID interaction with member countries, we have really accumulated a number of challenges we should like to share with you. First, all requests supported or presented by member countries to the bank, they lack comprehensive needs assessment data. And this is really very, very much mandatory, because it really has to inform the member country requests for the bank and other donors as well. Member countries mainly at the moment focus mostly on equipment and testing kits, and they deny majority of the most other important epidemic preparedness and response components, the 8 components highlighted by WHO. There is also lack of completely and timely data, and this is really a number of international organizations have complained of this, and this is reflects mainly the data which the countries are supporting, and mainly reflecting the situation in urban settings without much on the primary healthcare issue. The situation in member countries also shows evident gap in health human resources. There is a limited number of qualified health workers, from doctors down to the nurses, to at least respond properly for the this pandemic. There is also inadequate use of innovation to enhance the national response. Member countries, a number of countries like Malaysia, for example, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, they have done so far in using electronic health and mobile health in enhancing the support. And there is also less attention to basic primary health program. Last week, we have been participating in a webinar organized by the Joint Learning Network, where a number of member countries, including Bangladesh, Kenya, they have highlighted that based on their monitoring and evaluation, lots of programs, very essential programs like the EPI, the maternal and child health, and the chronic programs for chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, they are really getting less attention, and less people are addressing this, simply because in some cases, especially in Africa, there is unavailability of health workers, and the population is apprehensive for fear of the infection. Moreover, in some countries, health workers were really very reluctant to work in response to COVID because of lack of PPE and personal protective equipment and other necessary equipment. At the global level, we have all witnessed there are some challenges, especially the first one, the procurement bottlenecks in production and transportation, as highlighted by other speakers. There is high price escalation, which is really unaffordable, make it unaffordable for member countries to, the poor ones, to get whatever they want. And up to this moment, there is uncertain quality of testing kits, which WHO has very highlighted up to this moment. Countries, they insist to use the testing kits available in the market, despite their uncertain efficiency. Also, there is indefinite scientific evidence of an effective treatment, as highlighted also by Bruce and Professor Khan. There is still oscillation between the efficacy of chloroquine, and now we are at the dexamethasone phase. Still, countries and I think the scientific fora need to come up to the world with something which is really solid and accessible for member countries to use at large. In response to this, the IDB in last March has actually launched its 3R response package, which is a $2.3 billion US package addressing 3 main areas, which are corresponding the epidemic preparedness and response phases. The first one is the response, restore, and restart phases of the package. The first one is addressing the urgent health needs in terms of equipment, capacity, as well as basic supplies. And the restore phase is really targeting or addressing building the resilient health system and restoring livelihood and addressing health fallout, such as mental health and NCDs. And the REACE part is really addressing the mitigation of socioeconomic impact of the pandemic. All members of the isDB group have actually contributed to this PR package, including the Islamic Trade Financing, Islamic Corporation for the Development of the Private Sector, and the Islamic Corporation for the Insurance. King Abdulaziz Charity Fund for support, including Jordan, Pakistan, Somalia, Sudan. And this reflects that the availability of such kind of funds to assist member countries, especially to avail the basic needs, including the laboratory equipment and the PPEs and other supplies. In response to these challenges, the bank actually has devised a number of strategies to at least mitigate some and address the others, including direct engagement between the member countries and the isDB at all levels, whether the regional hubs, where the bank has got 11 regional hubs, and other isDB concerned entities at the headquarters, including the social infrastructure global practices. The country, as part of the 3R package, has actually launched a country platform accessible to member countries and key partners, where they can share their concerns and they to start implementing their approved projects through this platform by identifying means of procurement, as well as follow up for the interventions required based on their request. The bank was actually has fast-tracked the request for member countries in 24 hours from review to approval, which is really a very updated mode of response to member countries. There is expedited also disbursement process. The bank has stepped to enhance its partnership with the main partners, including for procurement and enhancing knowledge sharing and training. Partners include WHO, UNICEF, UNOPS, UNDP, IFRC, and many other partners. The bank is really now considering assessment of laboratory capacity in member countries with the aim of assisting member countries to have an informed decision-making process for capacity building. And this is really in partnership with the Network for Education Support Immunization, University of Antwerp in Belgium, and the Global Health Development Organization in the Middle East based in Amman. And up to this moment, more than 42 requests coming from 47 member countries have been considered, and the allocated budget out of the $2.3 billion is by now 1.6, and out of this, 98% has been actually committed for 38 operations in 29 member countries. Below in the graph, you will see member countries which have already had their request either been approved or on the process of approval. And I think by end of this week, we will have all these operations being cleared and approved. And one of the best practices the bank is really proud of is the e-learning knowledge sharing and training on this COVID pandemic, which really now we are actively feeling. In this webinar in collaboration with other partners, where the reverse linkage is the department which has initiated, the division which has initiated this online capacity development program to facilitate peer learning. To the moment, 5 webinars have been organized under this platform. 4 webinars have been targeted patient management and paramedical and social aspect. 1 webinar for South-South and triangulation cooperation in context of COVID. And the last 2 webinars took place just 31st of May and 2nd of June. And a new initiative is targeting capacity development initiative of medical laboratory in Africa, which is really very much timely and required not only for COVID, but as an activity to strengthen the health system in the side of the laboratory, which is really very much lacking in our member countries. The key highlights of this reverse linkage e-learning platform that more than 16,000 persons from 55 member countries and non-member countries also have actually viewed the interaction. Participants, more than 5,000 medical paramedical attendees from member countries, 18 countries, and more than 80 speakers from 20 countries have shared knowledge and expertise, including, as we have just seen, the Vice President of Samsung Biologics, Vice President of National Federation, Red Cross and Red Crescent, and a total of 23 hours of streaming, excluding the hours which we are really now involved in. There are a number of good practices which we have logged in, which could be of great help to our member countries. This including the data smart solution, e-health and mobile health for dissemination of risk communication messages for data collection and reporting and setting of appointments, as well as remote consultation. Malaysia has successfully actually embarked on this and proved to be really very helpful in enhancing the management. The community health workers program. This is really one of the forgotten aspects of the primary health care. As reported by the Lancet last March, UK, after the high surge of cases, now is thinking to consider a community-based health program for workers built on the successful community health care programs in Pakistan and Brazil and other countries. And this is really proved to be very successful in handling chronic cases without the need to accumulate and overwhelm health workers, as well as the very useful experience in dissemination of risk communication messages. Reliance on partnership with NGOs and CBOs. Again, this is really very important, and in such kind of a wide pandemic, reliance on and building the capacity of NGOs and CBOs will really participate or contribute to dissemination of risk communication and social support as well. Identification of high-risk communities, because not all the communities are equally affected. And this is really has been tested in Canada and identified to be really very focused. And the responsibility of the health managers and planners, as well as the other concerned governments, to at least focus on a thorough analysis of the magnitude of cases, so as to focus the effort and the response effort in areas where there is a need, instead of just going in a blank manner. Also, identification of one central location for all coronavirus-related information accessible to the population. And in some countries like USA and some countries in Asia, including Malaysia, there is a board in the downtown and other central areas to show exactly not only the progress of the COVID situation, but also where health facilities are accessible. And this is really very important to streamline the response and to at least flatten the apprehension of the community towards the. Amid all this, there are some risks which are still feasible for hampering our smooth response. The first ones, currently, we observe that there is a frenzy in member countries to accumulate supplies. This is really coupled with the donors' readiness for response, both undermine the importance of other quality important emergency preparedness and response components. For example, there is less attention to surveillance, as well as there is less attention to points of entry, as well as the laboratory. So we really don't want our member countries to be dragged by readiness of the suppliers or the donors to put money without getting. And the real message is that we shall go and consider a comprehensive approach for preparedness and response. Also, there are some producers of medical equipment and supplies. They directly attract member countries, and they provide offers which might negatively impact the balance between the quality and cost. And this is really calls for proper and for timely coordination with the relevant agencies, including WHO, to ensure the quality of the supply which our member countries are buying. There is also a risk of transforming the pandemic into a social risk. Simply the lockdown in some countries, many of them, has deepened the poverty because people who depend on their breadwinning on daily wages, they are no longer able to access their services, and because of that, they don't have any other. And this leads to disorder and unrest in some cases, which we have seen. And this is really a call for Ministry of Social Welfare to at least, during such kind of crisis, to at least direct their support to those who are much in need. And again, the risk of rapid unlocking and release of social distancing, which has highlighted by WHO, this might really get to the South Korea and Singapore syndrome, that after cheerful, quick unlocking, there is an observation of a high surge of cases, which call for another, and we are seeing it at the moment in China, where the country has recurred to blocking Beijing now as in the second wave of the, and really this is a risk, and it is a lesson as well. We have to really be careful of, and it's a message also for our African CDC to at least to consider in its messages to our member countries. COVID-19 pandemic is really, there is a risk of magnifying the colonial attitude in global health. We have already seen the investigation portrayal of effectiveness of TB vaccine in Africa, which I'm very, very much delighted that the Director General of WHO has reassured all the world that this should not happen. But it really worth to highlight because this is, again, a risk which, if countries are not very much aware to it, it might cause some really unnecessary reactions. Having said this, we have a number of recommendations which could help member countries and our communities to at least enhance their response. First, there is a need to enhance intra-sectoral collaboration between health, education, water, and social welfare. This is because of the multiplicity of areas of interaction between these, as well as coordination with UN agencies. Because basically WHO, UNICEF, UNDP, part of their mandate is to assist our member countries in preparation and regularly update of the needs assessment. So our message is for member to especially Minister of Health for close collaboration with these UN agencies to have an updated and as clear and as concise needs assessment. Also, coordinate and collaborate with the Red Crescent and Red Cross and active local NGOs to broaden the response base, because these agencies in every country, they have the capacity and the outreach share, which could go to bigger sites at the community level, where a lot of information surveillance could be enhanced and response could be also, including the test, could be also performed in a much more scientific manner. There is an urgent need to prioritize protection and motivation of the White Army, our frontline health workers. The number of countries we have observed that many front workers have resisted going to their facilities simply because they don't have PPEs and they are not motivated enough. So this is really a priority because these are the ones who are really plug this loop. And comprehensive actioning of the emergency preparedness and response to emphasize on points of entry, and this will really not only for the epidemic, but it's also strengthening the primary healthcare services and strengthening risk communication to combat epidemic, especially in our member countries, and in particular in the least developed countries, and with the high rate of lack of information and illiteracy, we should at least emphasize the importance of direct communication to at least enable messages reach the people, to encourage them to access and use the main primary healthcare programs, especially the EPI, MCH, chronic diseases, as well as combating the rumors and the misinformation and the misbeliefs, which thanks to the social media, a lot of wrong information, a lot of misinformation has been circulated, which should be combated to enhance our response. And again, use of technology to enhance the surveillance. And to this end, really, we should, majority of countries should consider establishing strategic health operation centers linked to satellite, regional, and district sentinel sites for more data collection and management and monitoring and evaluation, as well as use of the mobile phone for dissemination as well as for reporting. There is also a need for comprehensive training of all categories of health workers at the level to facilitate task shifting during health emergencies. And this is really one of the strategies that have been tested and been proved to be very effective, having our health workers ready to work not only on their basically trained profiles, but to extend their training to include other issues, including the emergency preparedness and response. Lastly, I would like also to recommend that our health workers and managers to keep themselves updated. To this end, WHO especially has provided lots of very valuable, and these are guidelines, of course, which are available on the website. During this COVID-19, WHO has launched its Open WHO, where online courses on every aspect of the 8 components and sub-components of the emergency preparedness and response have been made available. And this is really an advice and recommendation for all health workers to consider. The CDC and the European Center for Disease Prevention, they are all providing very valuable information, very updated information, not on the situation itself, but on how to deal with different aspects related to the response. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Bashir, and thank you for the Islamic. Thank you to the Islamic Development Bank for their continuous support in all these fields. So actually, about your presentation, I don't have really a question. It's more a remark. When we talked about the problem of indefinite scientific evidence, and you talked as example about actually dexamethasone and before hydroxychloroquine, and I don't really agree with the message that can be understood by that, because it suggests that we always have to wait for the strict scientific evidence to act. And the COVID-19 pandemic is a very good example for that. When you see the results in the Western countries who waited for these scientific results to start treating, the result is actually hundreds of thousands of deaths and ICU overwhelming. And when you see more modest countries in the south, like I can talk about Morocco, which is my country, so we didn't wait for that. We just used common sense. You work with what you have. For example, hydroxychloroquine, honestly, today, as per today, I don't know if it works, but it's proven that it has an antiviral activity. So in waiting for results, I use it in the period that logically it can be useful. So not in intensive care. You cited dexamethasone, it's the same. Dexamethasone is an anti-inflammatory drug, so when you use it in the inflammatory stage of the disease, you expect it to work. But if you have to wait for proofs to start, you will treat your patient, but maybe too late. So my message is that, and you gave that same message at the end of your presentation. My message is we don't need always to wait for others to give us proofs. We have to act by ourselves. We have to make choices, and most importantly, we have to produce our own data. Because it's a shame that we have a lot of publications about how dexamethasone works, or maybe how hydroxychloroquine doesn't work or works, I don't know. But all these publications come from Western countries, whereas in Africa we use a lot hydroxychloroquine, and honestly it seems to work, but nobody published any paper about this. So my message is, let's be autonomous. Let's try to have our own data and not just wait for the others to tell us what to say, what to do. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I may come back. I don't think that I have referred to such kind of a statement that calling for recommendation to wait for conclusive results. No, this is not at all. Has never been highlighted by me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We were expecting a question from Fred Boulamba, but I think he's not with us anymore. So I may let Professor Sal Adib give us a summary of what was being done. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Al-Bashir. Thank you for the Islamic Bank. So we will take 1 minute of technical break and we'll conclude. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much to all our speakers. We lived a special session. For me and for Ali, it was difficult because we are Arabic and French-speaking speakers, and English is not an easy language for us. And not a daily used language for speaking, but it was very, very rich for us to share with you. We had very, very prestigious speakers. That was a very important issue today. And the main term is collaboration and knowledge sharing. It was very important to share knowledge and experience from Jordan, from Kenya, from Turkey. It was very important to share the future with vaccines, with treatments, with research, and with collaborations between public, private, governmental, non-governmental. It was very important. So we don't have enough time, so I will be very fast. But for our auditors, you can find all the recorded session just after finishing. So the second point for me, and it was very important and repeated by all the speakers, is prevent. So social distancing, we have to be careful now because we can have a second wave everywhere, so like in Iran. So prevention, and prevention contains in the future, if there is vaccines, and now I'm convinced that perhaps vaccines will be a very important issue for finishing with this COVID SARS-CoV. Donc preventing, testing, and we had the experience of Africa CDC, which is it was very impressive. So we have to prevent, we have to test, we have to trace, and every country is doing his regulations for that, and treating, and as Ali said, treating according to the phase of the illness. If we are in the viral phase, we have to give antiviral treatment. If we are in inflammatory phase, we have to give anti-inflammatory treatment. And if we have the phase with the explosion of cytokines and we have consequences of inflammation and virus, we have to treat these consequences, and we have to use our capacities in intensive care units. Third issue is we don't have to forget the non-COVID patients and cancer patients. And we have to think now and prepare to care of them appropriately, and to do like rapid unlockdown and make it easy, also for health issues, also for economic issues, and for psychological issues. Fourth thing is the future. The future is research and education for everywhere. This is the main lesson from this pandemic. If we have educated people, if we did good training for health care workers, which are heroes in this pandemic, we will change the future. If we develop research and good research and with less conflicts of interests, we will have a good opportunity for the future. And for Africa, the future is we need to be autonomous in education, in healthcare, in research, in collaboration, and this South-to-South partnership is very, very important, but we will gain it with sponsorship, with partners from private, from the foundation, for non-governmental organization, and we have many, many examples of what human being can be done in big squares and in the l'échelle, in the individual part. So thank you very much to everybody. Thank you very much to Islamic Development Bank, to African Union Development Agency, CDC, Samsung Biologics, the government of Turkey, the Ministry of Health of Turkey, Jordan, to Aga Khan Foundation, and to the We Will Win Together. Thank you very much.